in the luxurious office of the director of the restaurant. In the place where the subordinates were usually located sat a man in his 50s. Since there was a tense silence in the room, one could assume that the upcoming conversation was quite serious. Little did he know that Philip Miller was anxiously awaiting the decision of his boss, James Harrison. Working as the manager of this fine establishment, he found himself in a situation where he urgently needed someone's help. Why on earth is he walking around? I've been sitting in this office for the past hour like a lost man, probably admiring his restaurant again, Philip thought with irritation. At the same moment, the door opened and James Harrison entered the room. He was a tall, trim man with a kind but overly pale face and a strong-willed chin. His shrewd gaze slid over Philip's face, unmistakably recognizing the uneasiness that plagued his employee's soul. "Shall we get to the heart of the matter, Philip? What is the reason for your desire to meet?" James Harrison said, sitting down in a leather armchair. "I hope your daughter Emily is all right." "Yes, of course she's fine," he answered hastily, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. It was hard to get to the point, though it should be easier for him since he was the manager of the restaurant. "That's good to hear," James Harrison said. "I've always sympathized with Emily. She's a lovely, sweet girl." Philip swallowed convulsively at this compliment to his daughter and looked at his boss with a hunted look. At the same moment, he realized the inevitable. James Harrison was his only chance to get out of debt, and that was to marry his daughter off to this rich man. But how do you get the boss to make that decision? To make it go smoothly? The tension in the room became so palpable that it felt like skates could be molded into the air. Philip visibly tensed, struggling to find the words that could convince his boss to agree to his proposal. "I realize this may sound sudden, but I'm in a very difficult situation," he began, his voice trembling with excitement. "What kind of trouble are you in, Philip? Am I not paying you enough? It seems to me that your salary is more than serious," the businessman said in surprise. Philip coughed embarrassedly. "Well, you see, I've got debts that I just can't pay off on my own." James Harrison frowned. A serious expression appeared on his face. He squinted at the manager, waiting for further explanation. The next words came with great difficulty to Philip. "You see, James, you probably know I've been looking for a suitor for my daughter for a long time. And Emily is sure to make a fine wife to whoever chooses her." James Harrison looked at his subordinate with bewilderment. "I do not understand what you're getting at, Philip. Do you need money for the wedding?" Then asked directly, "Why these curtsies?" But Philip was silent. His mind raced in search of a reasonable explanation. At last, catching on to one of the words he thought promising, he came to the main point. "James, the fact is, I would like to marry my daughter Emily to you." Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his hand involuntarily reached around his neck to loosen the knot of his tie. In truth, he'd never thought of Emily romantically, seeing her solely as the daughter of his manager, and here he was being offered to marry a girl about to become his stepdaughter. "Philip, I appreciate your confidence, but I don't think it's the best idea," he said cautiously. "Emily is a wonderful girl, but I don't think she's ever considered me for a fiancé." Philip's eyes twinkled with a sly twinkle. "James, it's the only way out for me. Emily won't mind, and Jessica doesn't think so either. And I'll be eternally grateful to you if you do." "Does Jessica really think so too? Why didn't she ever tell me that?" James Harrison exclaimed, and then his lips pressed into a thin line. Of course, the businessman understood the situation in which his subordinate found himself, along with his wife, who worked in the same restaurant as a cook's assistant. Truth be told, the thought of a marriage of convenience brought James no pleasure. "Easy. James Harrison, this is a touchy subject. I can't make a decision right away," he said. "I need time to think it over, to calculate all the risks." Philip looked pleadingly at his boss and tried to grasp every opportunity. "Please, James Harrison, give me a chance to make things right. My daughter Emily doesn't deserve the kind of life I've given her." James Harrison shook his head. The businessman then rose from his chair and walked to the window that offered a panoramic view of the city. On his haggard, pale face, there was an expression of deep thoughtfulness. He was trying to make a difficult decision. "Well, Philip, I promise to think it over carefully, and I'll let you know my decision as soon as possible," he said, turning to the manager. Philip respectfully extended his hand to the restaurant owner. "Thank you for your understanding. "I look forward to hearing from you," he said with relief. James Harrison nodded and shook the manager's hand firmly. Philip left the office with a heavy heart. The fate of his adopted daughter Emily and his own future now depended on the decision of the superintendent. Deep down, Philip felt that the boss would take the bait. After all, Rose was right. She had calculated everything subtly, immediately realized how to catch this rich man. They've been together for a year for a reason. Wife Jessica's a sucker. All her romantic dreams of love are ridiculous. No fool is a fool. Philip left his boss's office and immediately called Rose. "Hi, it's me. Did you talk to him and tell him what you told me?" "Of course I did, Philip. He was drooling at the thought of my Emily. Men are like that. But here's the thing about the hat instead of the dowry. Let James pay off our debts, and then we'll be on our way." Rose smiled. They talked for a while. Then they went about their business. Philip took control of the restaurant, and Rose watched another TV show. At the same time, Philip's wife Jessica was helping the chef Michael Thompson in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. It was rumored that he was friends with the owner himself and often visited him. "James has been a little down lately," the chef said casually. Jessica dropped her knife in surprise. "What do you mean, down?" "I think he's fine, but he's a little thin, of course. A little blush would be nice." "Why is it so bad?" Jessica asked anxiously. And to Thompson's side, sad. "It's bad, Jessica, and it's bad. They found a disease, but one that would break your tongue to pronounce. The prognosis is dire. They say James is ready to write his will." "Obey will?" Jessica was surprised. "But as far as I know, he's alone. No relatives." That chef chuckled. "That's what I'm talking about. James called a notary recently to prepare the necessary documents. He says I'll make a will in favor of the woman who agrees to marry me. What's he thinking? He's got half the town after him now. It's not right." "What about love? Feelings?" Jessica marveled. Michael Thompson frowned, tasting the dish he had prepared. "Well, when you've got 6 months to live, it's not that big of a deal. James wants to die in the arms of some pretty girl." "Well, I'm exaggerating, of course, but that's the gist of it. Who else would he leave his money to?" Jessica coughed, embarrassed. "Orphanages, for example, or social funds." Michael Thompson waved his hand. "No way, they'll steal it. You need to keep an eye on the money." "And who's going to do it?" "That's right. And so you see, and we'll still fall in love. Although, of course, the case is complicated. It's not easy to understand the true motives, but I'm not interested in any of that. I've known him since high school. We played hockey. I was a forward. He was a forward. Oh, how long ago was that?" Jessica nodded sympathetically, not even realizing that at that very moment her husband Philip was discussing the marriage of Emily and James Harrison. Time stretched like rubber, showing Philip eternity. Every phone call, every sound of footsteps behind him made his heart beat with furious force. To his only wife, Jessica, he said nothing. Only to his mistress, who had actually devised this cunning plan. Finally, close to lunchtime, the phone rang in his jacket pocket. Philip took the call with a trembling hand, realizing that it could fundamentally change his life. The caller was James Harrison, who again invited him to his office. Philip now went to his boss on his feet, trying not to notice the nasty shiver that ran down his back. This time, the chief met his subordinate with a serious, but at the same time not without sympathy look. "Philip, I've made a decision," he said with a dry official tone. "I agree to take Jessica and your daughter Emily. In doing so, I agree to pay off all your debts to creditors." Philip was so stunned that he couldn't even hold back the tears of relief, which of course were fake publicity. At the same moment, he hugged the businessman, replying with equally warm feelings. "Thank you, James Harrison. Thank you for saving me and my daughter from disgrace. And thank you for giving me a chance," the manager whispered, resting his face against his shoulder. The business boss felt the responsibility he had taken on and promised he would never regret the decision. "I will take care of Emily as if she were my own daughter. You can rest assured of that." Philip nodded demurely and began to discuss the details with the chief. In a confidential conversation, they set the day of the wedding, which was to take place in a week's time. James Harrison, horrified at the sight, was not in the least embarrassed by this haste. Philip, on the other hand, was over the moon. After all, he would not only get rid of debts, but also provide his adopted daughter a bright future. True, first of all, he thought, of course, about his own benefit, and everything else was a matter of tenth. And if Jessica and Emily knew what lay ahead of them, the first to know was the wife. It was in the evening when Jessica returned from work later than her husband, who, as the manager, was in fact her boss. By this time, the atmosphere in the house was already tense, which at any moment could erupt in anger and resentment. Jessica stood in the living room with her purse on the floor, her hands shaking and her eyes burning with tears. Opposite her, her husband was seated comfortably in an armchair by the blazing fireplace. The cold, calculating expression on Philip's face contrasted perfectly with the shock in his wife's eyes. "How could you?" Jessica blurted out from the doorway. At the same moment, her voice broke into a scream. "How could you sell our daughter for debt? Have you nothing sacred left?" Wide smiles. "You know, it's not really a sale, more like a lucrative contract, if you will. I'm just securing our family's future and nothing more. James Harrison is a wealthy man, and being related to him will save us from financial problems in the future. And not just us, but Emily herself, and even her children." "Have you thought about the shame?" Jessica spluttered. "You're giving our daughter away to a man twice her age. What will people think of us? How am I supposed to face the restaurant staff if I become the mother-in-law of the owner?" "James Harrison is a respected man in the community," Philip said reasonably, "and he looks quite lively for his age." "How much do you understand? Feelings are not bought with money." "Certainly not love," Jessica retorted. "And how could you set our daughter up like that? She's a young, beautiful girl. Yes, she deserves much more than to be a pawn in your financial scams." After his wife's words, Philip instinctively looked around, although he knew perfectly well that Emily was still at work. A nurse in therapy sounds proud. 24 hours a day at work and not much profit. But now that she was gone, Philip decided to continue the awkward conversation. "This isn't about toys, Jessica," he exclaimed angrily. "This is a matter of life and death. And first and foremost for you, dearie, we're on the verge of ruin. And James Harrison is our only chance to save ourselves. And if this wedding falls through, you won't have a job at the restaurant. Worst case scenario, you'll be selling pies at the bus stop." Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes. "Do you think it's okay that our salvation should depend on our daughter's marital status? Does Emily deserve to be married like that?" "Didn't she?" Philip objected. "She deserves the opportunity to secure a secure future for herself and her future children. And what do you suggest? Bend over backwards for the rest of her life in this department. With James Harrison, she'll be living like Christ, holding a fortune in her hands," Philip said confidently. "No, what are you talking about? Our daughter deserves to be loved." "Philip, but why should she have his money when James Harrison is seriously ill?" Jessica insisted. "She doesn't need wealth. She needs real feelings." Sick. That's a good one." "I didn't know that," Philip said in surprise. "Then she'll be an heiress sooner, won't she?" "She'll be rewarded with your love," Jessica said bitterly. "Nonsense. A fiction. A luxury we can't afford now. But money is something else," Philip replied without blinking an eye. "And you want to solve your problems at the expense of your daughter? Maybe you better start moving yourself." Jessica exclaimed, choking back tears. "Peace ends. Of course. How could I not? Especially since she's not my own daughter, and neither are you. So there's no need to appeal to my fatherly feelings. But James said it's her destiny, period. You and I owe it to her to make her happy," Philip said in one breath. Jessica covered her face with her hands and sobbed. "Destiny? What do you know about it? We're going to ruin her life, you know, and Emily is my own daughter. So what if I took her from an orphanage? It's not the mother who gave birth. It's the mother who raised her." Philip's cheeks are flushed with anger. "My mother is an orphanage, the daughter of an alcoholic. Are you out of your mind?" "Yes, I agreed to the custody arrangement and took care of her all this time. I'm still taking care of her now. You hear me? And if you get it in the way, I will tell Emily the truth. You don't want that, do you?" "So calm down, Jessica. Think about your family and use your judgment. It's just the way it is. You don't want us to end up on the street, do you?" Jessica slumped her shoulders, shaken by her sobs, her heart breaking with worry for her daughter's future. She knew Philip was right, and though their family was on the brink of ruin, James Harrison couldn't be their only hope, not at this price. No, not at the cost of their only daughter's fate. "No, I can't do it, Philip," she whispered. "I can't sell my daughter. I'd rather be on the street, but not this." Philip smiled smugly, then took the poker and began to stir the embers in the fireplace, making sparks fly in all directions. "You've already done it," he said, calming down a little. "Yes, Jessica, you've already sold your daughter. From the moment James and I signed the prenup papers." Jessica looked up at her husband in surprise. Her eyes were full of pain and despair. "What prenup? What are you talking about? We can still back out. We could apologize to James Harrison. He'll understand, won't he?" With a sneer. Philip interjected. "Yes, he'd destroy us if he knew we'd changed our minds. He already treats us with contempt, treats us like servants. Fetch, serve, and get out of his sight. Don't think he'll forgive us for this." Jessica recoiled from her husband. At that moment, her heart almost burst with pain. Truth be told, she still couldn't believe that Philip was so easily willing to sacrifice his daughter's happiness for his own gain. "You monster," Jessica shouted. Do you hear me? I hate you." Philip gave her a scornful look, but did not reply. He simply got up from his chair and walked out of the living room. Jessica still stood there, unable to take a step, her whole body trembling. She knew that her husband would never change his mind. That meant Emily was doomed. While Jessica and Philip were discussing their relationship, James Harrison was sitting in his office watching the fish swimming in the aquarium. The businessman was not feeling well. Painkillers practically did not help, so he felt a strong decline in strength. In his head were born thoughts of how to burn a profitable alliance with Emily. God, marrying Philip's daughter. What if it didn't work out? But he was on the verge of bankruptcy. It would be an ingenious move on Philip's part to get him out of financial trouble. James cringed at the thought of it. At 49, he already felt like a real old man. And then there was this disease. It had aged him in a matter of months. Did he need this wedding? A difficult question, and one he didn't know the answer to. He also doubted Emily's motives. Would she truly love him, or would she be just an obedient tool in her father's hands? The thought of a marriage based on mutual gain was unpleasant to him. In truth, he wanted true love, the union of two hearts. Besides, a marriage with Emily could ruin his reputation, because people will surely whisper that he is a cold-blooded, calculating rich man, ready to do anything to satisfy his own ego. Emily is beautiful, of course, but is she intelligent, kind, sensual? They've barely spoken to each other. What if she doesn't like me? Looking at his own reflection in the mirror, James whispered. The businessman's doubts increased when he realized he was overestimating the importance of the union. After all, most marriages of convenience last for years. What's easier for everyone? One pays, the other bathes in luxury. You, me, I, you, nothing complicated. The usual scheme of human exchange based on the sale of feelings. It's all right. But James wanted to feel truly loved, desired, not just a tool in someone else's hands. Not an easy decision, but you have to weigh it carefully. And he had to be honest with himself, with Philip and Jessica. But maybe there's another way that doesn't require sacrifice. Maybe I could find a way to help Philip without marrying his daughter. James asked himself again, wiping the mirror with the palm of his hand. Little did he know that this was what he had been doing for the past few years, without any close friends. James Harrison was talking to himself, as if he were talking to his twin brother on the other side of the mirror. Sighing sadly, the businessman stood up and walked to the window. The city, too, had been swallowed up by twilight. The lights of lanterns and signs pierced the darkness like the identifying lights of ships heading toward a strong beacon. For a moment, James felt so alone that he wanted to howl with longing, and yet there were so many people hanging around. But James needed someone who could understand and share the last days of his life with him. Maybe even give him a glass of water or gently cover his eyelids when he was gone. Or maybe even weep at his grave and bring him a bouquet on his anniversary. Dreams. James knew that Philip's daughter was beautiful. But was that all that mattered? Would they be able to create something truly worthwhile together? Realizing that he couldn't make a final decision, James decided to talk to Emily in person. To do this, He was going to call her to his restaurant tomorrow to observe her manners and words. Perhaps it was then that the businessman would be able to understand whether they had a future together. And if not, well, we will have to accept that not all problems can be solved with the help of money, although he will still fulfill his obligations to Philip. After all, James considered himself a man of his word and was not going to break it, even in the face of his own death. How long did Dr. Thompson give him? A month? 3? Could he be lucky enough to last 6 months? Unsure of his theory, the businessman decided to call Emily the next morning, since he knew for a fact that tomorrow was her day off. Probably in this whole amazing story, Emily was the only one who didn't know until the last what was going on around her and what her parents and the businessman were up to. In the life of a young nurse, Emily also changed, and the kind that if her father found out about it, he would definitely go into hysterics, sputtering saliva and stomping his feet. It all began a little over a week ago. That morning, the rays of dawn were barely breaking through the blinds as Emily, a nurse on the therapy ward, prepared to turn in for her shift. But she was in for a bitter disappointment as the shift nurse, Felipe, had not shown up for work. Well, once again, the superintendent called her into the office. Emily thought bitterly. She, in turn, had spent a sleepless night tormented by doubts and fears. As it happened, not only was her place as a nurse on the ward at stake, but also the life of a man who was on death's doorstep. It all started with the fact that, late in the evening, a man without documents was brought to them with signs of severe pneumonia. He was brought by a city cab driver who could not pass by, because this vagrant collapsed on the hood of his car while crossing the street. At first, I thought he was just trying to get money from me, set me up. But when I touched his forehead, I knew. He's got a high fever, the driver said as he pulled the unconscious guy into the squad room. Emily nodded and helped pull him into the corridor. The tramp's condition was clearly critical, and without treatment, he had no chance of recovery. Thanking the cab driver, Emily, at her own risk, decided to give him first aid. As she did so, she saw in the stranger's eyes a strength of spirit and will to live that was felt on a subconscious level. Despite the disapproval of her colleagues and the threats of the doctor on duty, Emily made the bold decision to go against all odds. At her discretion, she introduced additional procedures and stayed with the patient throughout the night, providing not only medical but also psychological support. The night dragged on for an agonizingly long time. "What's your name?" After checking the patient's temperature, Emily asked. The boy shuddered and then slowly opened his eyes. "Victor. My name is Victor," he whispered. "That's good. Rest until morning. There's still time. We'll see," Emily whispered. Victor's condition improved a little and then worsened again. Emily did not leave his bedside for a minute, watching his every breath and movement. She believed that despite all predictions, the tramp would make it through the morning. Her perseverance and dedication began to bear fruit. By the time of the first shift, Victor's breathing had become more even, and his temperature began to gradually drop. But when ward manager Robert Stevenson came to check on his progress, he was surprised and shocked by what had happened. "Emily, who is this guy? And what right do you have to treat him as you see fit? Why did you give him a private room? Aren't you taking on too much?" he asked defiantly. Emily shuddered and began to explain what had happened. Even though the patient was doing well, she was still in danger of being fired. But she didn't regret her decision. She had saved a man who no one had given a chance, and that was more important to her than her own career. "I've seen a lot of things, but this, why on earth would you bring him to the station? Did you know we're having a ministry inspection at the clinic today? You should at least listen to the doctor on duty. Well, call a cab and get out of here with your tramp," Robert Stevenson stated unequivocally and pointed at the door. At that moment, Victor opened his eyes and understood everything without words. Staggering, he got up from the bed, got dressed, and disconnected the drip. "Good boy, you got it right," the superintendent muttered. Emily shook her head contritely. What could she do? But she couldn't take the patient home with her. Her father would make a scene, and she didn't want that. She could treat the vagrant remotely, though, giving him injections at another place she'd only recently learned of in her unenviable position. It was the only right thing to do, and so it had to be done that way and no other. Victor, on the other hand, took it calmly. He did not push pity, and also did not become hysterical or beg to leave him in the hospital. He dressed silently and, nodding goodbye, walked toward the exit. Emily looked at the superintendent with a mute reproach in her eyes and, without saying goodbye, followed, supporting Victor by the shoulder. Emily led him hurriedly to the cab. The tramp's pale cheeks seemed whiter than snow in the sunlight, and his gray eyes expressed almost nothing that they should have. "Where are we going?" He wheezed in a weak voice. "Someplace safe. Someplace where you'll be taken care of," Emily replied. Luckily, the cab stopped right by the side of the field. She carefully placed Philip in the back seat, then handed the driver a slip of paper with the address of an abandoned house on the outskirts of town that served as a shelter for the homeless. As the cab moved forward, the hustle and bustle of the city was replaced by abandoned industrial neighborhoods. The landscape of parks turned into weedy wastelands. Gleaming high-rises gave way to the dilapidated houses of the poorer neighborhoods. The cabbie drove in silence. He didn't want to start a conversation with the tramp, and this despite the fact that Philip behaved decently and looked almost nothing like a homeless man. Finally, the car stopped in front of a dilapidated two-story house. The brick facade of the building was cracked like an old man's face. The windows hadn't had glass in 10 years, if not more. A sign that read "House of Mercy" hung from the moldering wooden doors. Emily carefully opened the door and helped Philip out of the car. The cool spring air finally knocked the heat from his exhausted body. After paying the cab driver, Emily and Philip entered the dimly lit hallways that smelled of dampness and disinfectant solution. At the same time, a slouching figure in a white coat advanced toward them. Emily recognized her. It was Rose, a nurse who had been in the same group at medical school. They had chosen very different jobs. Emily became a nurse in the therapy department, and Rose became a nurse in a shelter for the homeless and destitute. Together they took Philip to a tiny room, where they laid him on an old, creaking bed. A small window barely let in the dim light, highlighting the dusty ceilings and shabby walls. Philip's body began to shake again. Rose took out a thermometer and put it to the tramp's chest. The man's heart was racing as if he had just run a 100-meter race for time. "He has severe pneumonia," Emily explained. Had dreaded glum. "He needs antibiotics and oxygen." Rose nodded and fetched a small first aid kit and vials of medicine from the cabinet. With confident movements, she injected the antibiotic into Philip's vein and put the oxygen mask on his face. The trembling in the patient's body gradually subsided as the medicine began to flow through the IV into his body. Emily stood a little to the side and watched Rose care for the patient with mixed feelings of gratitude and sadness. She knew he wouldn't have lived a day without their help. "How did he end up on the street?" Rose asked. "It's hard to say," Emily sighed. "He doesn't say much. I met him a few hours ago. I wanted to leave him at the station, but they wouldn't let me." Rose nodded in agreement. She'd seen enough street people in her life to know that each of them had a complicated history. Philip, on the other hand, was just another poor wretch in a long line of people left behind by ruthless society. "I'll take care of him," Rose said. "Until he feels better, he'll stay here." "Thank you, Rose. I won't forget your help." Emily said goodbye and went outside. Then she hailed a cab again and asked the driver to take her home. All the way home she thought of Philip, forgotten by everyone, but given a second chance at life. The next day Emily returned to Mercy House with hot soup, a plate and a spoon. She found Philip lying in bed with a tattered book in his hands. His breathing was hoarse, and his face was covered with a crimson blush. His eyes were sunken and his lips were pressed into a thin line. Emily gently fed Philip some soup and offered him a bath, to which he shook his head negatively. The nurse smiled and sat silently by his side, holding his hand. It went on like this for about a week. Emily visited Philip, and together they talked in hushed tones about everything. Of course, because of her work, Emily couldn't spend too much time at Mercy House. But despite this, she still tried to visit the patient almost every day. Naturally, she kept it all a secret from her parents, especially from her father, who lately had been thinking of marrying her off well. Her mother, on the other hand, did not rush her daughter with her choice, wanting to keep her by her side longer. Emily was also well aware of the fact that she was adopted and found out about it quite by accident, when, as a high school student, decided to do a general cleaning of the house. In the absence of her parents, everything came out of the blue when a folder of custody papers fell into her hands from the top shelf of her closet. I wondered, who were her real parents? Were they rich or poor? Did they have any other children? Or was she the first one they decided to get rid of? She didn't know the answer to these questions. However, in order not to upset her, her mother decided to hide the truth about those very documents from her. Let it be so. Why upset the person who loves you more than life itself? That's what Emily thought as she walked home from work one more time. She had no idea what her father had in store for her when he saw her daughter leave. Philip decided to come in from afar. First he asked how work was and if she was doing well. Then he got to the point by saying that his boss, James Harrison, wanted to see her tomorrow. Emily's amazement knew no bounds. To see me? Why should he? I'm nothing to him. The daughter of a restaurant manager, but James Harrison probably knows better, Philip said with pressure and looked meaningfully at his wife. Jessica sighed sadly and turned away from the window. Her husband had deftly played on her pain point, making her fear that her daughter might learn the truth about her past. What could she do? Talk her out of it and not go? But that wouldn't do anything, would it? Philip had already taken money from James, and not only had he taken it, but he'd already given it to his creditors. Of course, Jessica was bitter about what was happening. Her only hope was that her daughter would resent it and not go through with the deal. But she would have to come to that decision on her own to understand, to feel the whole situation. If only Jessica could have known that at that very moment, Emily was only concerned about one thing: the health of Ben's little brother, who was slowly, perhaps, on the mend. The next morning, so as not to upset Daddy, Emily went to meet James Harrison at the wrestling. By this time, the office of the businessman and creditor was literally saturated with an atmosphere of anxious expectation. Huge windows overlooking the city that lived its life gave the illusion of boundless power and authority. Behind the massive walnut desk sat James Harrison himself. The businessman's shrewd gaze, hidden behind his fine-rimmed glasses, was like an X-ray scanning those who dared to cross the threshold of his office. Today James wore an austere, dark blue suit that accentuated his lean figure and commanded the respect of those who had acquired a patriarchal paunch by this age. Emily knocked on the door before stepping over the threshold and timidly asking, "May I, James Harrison?" The businessman nodded as if the guest were his companion, not the daughter of a subordinate, anticipating a difficult conversation. The girl's heart raced and her hands became moist, as if before the most important exam of her life. A plain dress and low-heeled shoes made her look modest, a person who knew the value of money. The bright blush on her cheeks was evidence of the nervous tension she was trying to hide under a mask of ostentatious calm. Emily's appearance caught James Harrison's attention. A slight smile lit up his lips as he leaned back in his chair, assessing his visitor. The appearance was flawless. Her delicate features, large expressive eyes, and light chestnut-colored hair could drive anyone crazy, except that James himself wasn't going to go crazy. Not at all. In fact, under the guise of a bride, he was buying himself a daughter for an indefinite period of time, whose beautiful face would be the last thing he would see on this sinful earth. Well, in the meantime, let everyone think I'm a lusty rich man who has decided to gratify his ego in the face of his imminent demise. "Have a seat, Emily," he said in a low, measured voice. His cold tone left no doubt that the conversation was. Emily sank awkwardly to the edge of the chair, her skinny hands clenched into fists under the table. Of course, she couldn't ignore the hardness of James Harrison's gaze, which seemed to penetrate the most secret corners of her soul. "I don't know what to say." She immediately gave the initiative to the master of the office. "I know your father's in dire straits," James Harrison began, crossing his fingers in a lock on the newly flat surface of the desk. "However, I'm sure I can help him with his debts. I hope Philip has warned you about that." The businessman's words had an icy shower effect on Emily. The surprise took her breath away, and tears came to her eyes. "But my daddy didn't tell me anything about the debts," she whispered in a voice shaking with despair. "Okay, I didn't really doubt that. Surely Philip must have dumped that part of the case on me." James Harrison stretched out disappointedly. "And after all, his personal business has gone bust and he won't be able to repay the loan without my help. But don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm a charitable organization. I have obligations too." Emily felt that the businessman was leading her to something important, something that would change her life completely and irrevocably. For better or for worse. "I'm sorry, I don't understand what this is about," Emily asked timidly. James Harrison sighed sadly, displaying a complete semblance of compassion. "Believe me, I'm really, really sorry, Emily. I understand this is a difficult time, and your father was doing the best he could. Except we're talking about a considerable amount of money, he said. And even if I were to agree to be a guarantor to reimburse the creditors, I'm not sure your father would be able to handle the payments. Please give my dad a chance, Emily pleaded, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. I won't let you down. Would you like me to work for you for free on the weekends? Or write promissory notes in my name? Just save me. The young girl's tears involuntarily broke James Harrison's restraint, forcing him to relive some of the less pleasant moments in his life. And after all, he hadn't gotten to the most important part yet, but how to tell this innocent-eyed girl what he was really up to. Where to get the nerve not to burn with shame? Thinking about it, James looked away, unable to withstand the direct and emotional appeal. There was silence in the office for a while, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, James Harrison looked at Emily again. For the first time since their meeting, something resembling understanding flashed in the businessman's eyes. All right, Emily, he said, pronouncing her name slowly, as if hearing it for the first time. I'm willing to give your father a chance, but you must realize that if you don't fulfill your obligations to me, your father will be in serious trouble. Hope shone in Emily's eyes, and the tears and sadness on her face were replaced by a wide smile. Thank you, she uttered with relief. I won't let you down. Don't even doubt it. And what do I need to do for you to get your father's debt paid? James Harrison turned pale, realizing that the moment of truth had arrived. Here he would gather air in his chest and say what Philip could not say. Just don't drift, the man mentally told himself. Finally, realizing there was no turning back, he said in a choked voice, You must be my wife, Emily. Emily flinched and pressed her back against the back of the chair. A wife. But we have such an age difference. How is that even possible? James got up from the table and started pacing around the room like a man on a roll. At this point, he was ready to fall through the ground in shame. Why had he said that? Why had he gone along with Philip? The businessman's condition suddenly worsened dramatically, causing him to nearly collapse from the extreme pain in his chest. Are you feeling ill? Emily shouted as she saw the businessman slumped on his side, clinging to the edge of the table with his fingers. No, it will pass surely. Now, just a little more. The pills are in my jacket pocket, James whispered, losing consciousness. Even though Emily was a nurse, this was hardly the first time she had encountered something like this. I'm going to call an ambulance now, she exclaimed through tears. When Emily reached for the phone at the foot of the businessman's desk, she saw the man writhing on the floor with his hands around his throat. Oh my God, he had a laryngeal injury. She quickly dialed the ambulance number and whispered to the dispatcher, explained the situation in a nutshell. The dispatcher replied, You see, there's been a serious accident downtown. A truck is skidded at speed and it has demolished several cars. We don't have any crews available right now. Say, you're a medical professional, right? Right? The female dispatcher asked. Yes, I'm a medical technician. But what does that change? Aren't you going to send a resuscitation team to me? He's dying. Hear me. He's dying, Emily tearfully shouted into the phone. Calm down, girl. My name is Sarah. I was a medical surgeon in the past. Tell me, would you be able to perform a tracheostomy on a patient under my supervision? Emily nearly dropped the phone in amazement. A tracheostomy. But I work in internal medicine, and I've never picked up a scalpel. That's okay. Calm down and listen to me carefully. There's a first time for everything sometime. If you don't do this, the patient will die of asphyxiation. Do you understand? Sarah exclaimed. Emily shifted her gaze to the injured James Harrison and realized that there was no other option anyway. What happened next she remembered like a blur. She called the waiter and ordered him to bring a clean towel, a knife, and something to sanitize. Her mother, Jessica, was in the kitchen at the time, helping the chef prepare another order. Emily acted almost mindlessly, as if on automatic. She made an incision with the knife near her throat, inserted the tube, and was relieved to hear the distinctive whistling sound. My God. The patient is breathing, really breathing, ran through her mind. For a while, James Harrison even opened his eyes as if he wanted to say something very important. Tears flowed from the businessman's eyes as he realized that Emily had just saved his life. It wasn't long before the emergency room doctors finally arrived. Emily sat in the corner and cried, crying because she had never been so heartbroken. When Jessica heard what had happened, she ran into the office and began to hug her daughter. I'm sorry, honey. I'm so stupid for listening to your father. You shouldn't have come here and you don't need any money. Let him work it out for himself. Emily looked at her mom in surprise. You knew about this too. And you didn't say anything? At first, I kept quiet, but then my dad started blackmailing me into saying that he'd tell me like I wasn't related to you. Now, you knew? Emily blurted out. Jessica covered her face with her hands and cried again. Meanwhile, the paramedic on the team began thanking the nurse for the surgery. Yes, you surprised me, girl, very much. It had to be so skillfully conducted, step by step, and the incision is so neat. Want to show medical students in lectures. I think the surgeon on duty will be grateful to you. That I am AT. It's Sarah, thanks, your dispatcher. She was the one who directed you. The paramedic was silent for a moment, and then politely said goodbye and followed his colleagues, carrying James Harrison to the ward of the local hospital. And at this very moment, her unworthy father was miles away, in a cozy bed with his mistress Rose. So, did we spin this thing out pretty good? The hottie asked. Alex looked at the girl with disbelief, but it's too early to say for sure. You know, James can change his mind 100 times. True, he has already transferred the money to pay off my imaginary debt. Well, I've got it all figured out. Now all I have to do is wait for him to include your daughter in his will, and it's done. He smiled. Alex visibly tensed. Listen, how did you know that Adamson wanted to include in the will the girl who would agree to commit her life to him? The pretty girl smiled coquettishly and stood up from the bed, adjusting her robe. How did you know? So the personal notary of this rich man is my half-brother Igor. Didn't you know? He's the one who told me that James intends to make a will in favor of. You don't know who you're talking to, you know? So I decided to use your Emily. What's a beauty to waste? Let her work off the stipends and good treatment. Philip grinned in agreement. He had chosen reality TV for a reason. Beautifully ambitious. And smart as that professor. Jessica was a shepherdess from the village, in a word. No brains, no imagination. The only thing Philip was worried about was that James Harrison would die before he could take his daughter as his wife. And if he does, the money will quite expectedly flow into his Alyosha's pockets, and being a wife will wait. All the same, one of them is not his own, and the other is unloved. So what's the fuss? It's better to go to the sea with Rose to rest for a week or two on the sand to fry. Water to treat themselves, to rest, so to speak, from the labors of the righteous, he thought. When Emily left the restaurant, she realized that she just had to see Ben, who'd been feeling better lately. Despite the fact that the guy practically merged, he did not leave the walls of the House of Mercy and began to help not with the sick as an orderly, which is quite a worthy occupation, especially given the specifics of the work. After all, Emily knew very well that vagrants were extremely reluctant to seek help in medical institutions. It is understandable. One has problems with the law, the other has no documents. But when the homeless saw Ben, they knew he was just like them. I mean, he's a poor bastard, a tumbleweed. But how can you not believe him when just yesterday he was collecting empty bottles, scrap metal, and waste paper side by side with you? Ben saw Emily and smiled and waved. Hey, how's it going? The guy asked cautiously. She only waved back. What are you talking about? What business is there? Nothing but trouble. I had to save my... Ben's face paled, my fiancé. I didn't know you had a boyfriend. Emily smiled. Come on, why are you jealous? What boyfriend? That's just me joking around. My father's got some kind of combination to get me into a fake marriage to pay off his debt. Only I don't like the whole thing. Oh, I love it, Ben exhaled in relief. I was getting upset, thinking I'd never see the light of day without you. Emily shook her head with a smile. You can't even think about that. It's okay. I think that after what happened, Dad will give up on his idea because it doesn't make any sense now. The young people talked some more, and then Emily went home, and Ben continued to work at the homeless shelter. It was always a busy place. The old building was crying out for repairs, but there was no money for it. So they had to screw something on and off and patch things up until their muscles ached. But no sooner had Emily reached the bus stop than her smartphone rang in her purse. Picking up the phone, she was surprised to hear an unfamiliar male voice. Good afternoon. Emily Jamison Adamson. Yes, it's me. What's up? She asked confusedly. There was an awkward pause on the other end of the wire, after which the same ingratiating voice continued. And I'm Igor Thompson. Perhaps you've heard of him. No. Why would I have heard of it? Emily marveled. Well, if only because I'm a family notary specifically working with James Harrison. Emily shrugged. So what of it? I'm neither cold nor hot about it. Well, I can see what's what, after all. Anyway, I'll get to the main point. Tell me, would you mind coming to my office? Let's say in half an hour. It's not far away, Communal Street, Building 8. You'll see the sign there, it's prominent, so you won't miss it. Emily raised an eyebrow in surprise. Come to you. Why? Why? Well, I'll answer it. It's about James Harrison's will, the notary replied. Well, will? Is he dead? I saw him just a couple hours ago, Emily exclaimed. No, he's not dead, just admitted to the hospital. But there are arrangements for that as well, so let's not waste each other's time. Anyway, everyone, I'm waiting. Come. Emily wanted to object, but the notary had already interrupted the call, leaving her standing in the middle of a street in confusion. Okay, whatever, I'll go. What else did they come up with in there? Emily whispered and walked in the opposite direction. What was her amazement when at the notary's office she saw her parents and some woman with a very rough appearance and long legs. As it turned out a little later, the stranger's name was Rose Prudnikova, and she too had her own interest in the case. Emily, what are you doing here? Didn't that crazy rich guy invite you to this show? Philip exclaimed. Emily only shrugged uncertainly. I came because I was told to come. But what claim can there be? Fortunately, the notary didn't beat around the bush, and after inviting all the participants in the proceedings to come inside, got down to business. I have gathered you here to announce the decision of James Harrison. Who wants to make his will public early? Is that even possible? How is that even possible? You mean I'm going to die tomorrow and you're going to be the heir today? What nonsense is that? Exclaimed Philip, who felt extremely uncomfortable being near his mistress. Rose was making eyes at him, not the least bit embarrassed by his wife's presence. After Philip's words, the notary grimaced and, after a pause, continued. I repeat once again for those who do not understand. James Harrison has his own view of the situation, and only he has the right to decide when his will be announced to all present. So I'll tell you at once, all financial assets, real estate, the firm, James Harrison is going to leave on the line of Philip Adamson. From astonishment, the young nurse almost collapsed in a faint. How can I? It must be a mistake. Then tell me it's a prank. Am I caught in the lens of a hidden camera? The notary smiled. No, Emily Filipovna. The possibility of a mistake is ruled out. Not only that, you became an heiress by right of descent. That is, being the daughter of James Harrison. There's a daughter? We took Emily from the orphanage. Jessica shouted. Well, yes, that's the way it was. That rich man must be out of his mind, Philip chimed in. Trey measured him with a scornful glance. No, James Harrison's head is quite all right. There is a forensic medical report dated February 20 of this year that Emily Filipovna is his daughter. If you'd like to read it. February 20th. But then I didn't even talk to James about marrying off my daughter in payment of the debt. How could he have known all this, and why did he make the will in advance? Philip did not hold back. Then there was an awkward pause. No one present dared to break it. At that moment, Rose came on the stage, and first of all, she gave her lover a glare and did it defiantly in front of Jessica. So you're asking, how did James know about all of this? Rose began in a languid voice. From me, of course. Who else would it be from? All this time, I've been working for James and infiltrating your confidence to instill the idea that you absolutely had to marry your daughter off to him. Philip turned pale, then began gulping for air with his mouth like a beached fish. But why did you do it? What was the point of it? And how could Emily be his daughter? Rose smiled. Very simply. Years ago, James broke up with a girl named Erin, who, without knowing it herself at the time of the altercation, was pregnant by him. Can you guess what happened next? Emily's biological mother suffered from a rare form of blood disease and passed away 3 days after giving birth. That's how Emily ended up in an infant home, from where she was safely taken by you and your spouse. Jesus. So I've been raising James Harrison's daughter all this time. just to please him, Philip burst out. But Rose was not impressed. As it turned out later, James Harrison only found out about his daughter's existence 6 months ago when the donor sample bank gave him a 100 match. That's when the businessman realized that all this time his daughter was around. True, she lived in the family of his subordinate, but who cares? The main thing is that he really did have a daughter. In addition, James had long wanted to expose his manager in fraud, so they sent me Rose with a special task. The businessman wanted to see if the foster father would pass a background check or sell his daughter for money. Since Philip had chosen the second option, James Harrison decided to act as the situation dictated. Now, if Philip hadn't given his daughter away and protected her, the businessman would probably never have been able to tell Emily about his relationship to her. But things turned out the way they did. Seeing her adoptive father in such an unflattering light, Emily waved her hand and left the notary's office in tears. Her mother ran out after her and decided to get a divorce. Frankly speaking, she had previously suspected her spouse of infidelity, but this case was the last straw. On the way to the hospital where her father was lying, Emily told her mother about Ben, that she was in love with him. I'm furious and sailing. Good for you, daughter. I hope you'll be happy with him. Half an hour later, Emily, Jessica, and Ben were gathered in the room of James Harrison, who had come to his senses and was looking at his daughter with tears in his eyes. And when Ben publicly asked the businessman for his daughter's hand in marriage, James Harrison was over the moon. Responding with approval, the businessman blissfully closed his eyes. Perhaps this was his male happiness, the very thing when you want to go on living no matter what. There is for the sake of whom, and also to successfully fight the disease to dance at the wedding of his daughter, whom he had found only 6 months ago. Suddenly, Matthew hears a knock on the door and sees a freezing stranger with a baby in her arms. Right after she got her diploma, Anastasia rushed off to Unity City. Didn't even stay for graduation. Not because her classmates had done something to offend her. She wanted to start a new adult life as soon as possible. My mom kept telling me to. Anastasia, where are you running to? But at least stay for graduation. You've been with the guys for 11 years. Don't you want to say goodbye? You'll leave tomorrow. One day won't solve anything. Anastasia didn't listen. It seemed to her that if she didn't leave today, she would miss something important, and her life would take a completely different path. If she knew, maybe it was better to listen to her mom and turn down the path she had set out on. But for now, she knew nothing, and she considered her mom's entreaties an attempt to keep her daughter at home. She doesn't want to let go. It's understandable. The town was called Unity. Near the city were strange cliffs with flat slopes, as if a giant cleaver had been walked over them. These perfectly flat cliffs were white in color. The town was small, but it had a large metallurgical plant. In fact, first there was a steel mill, and the town gradually appeared around it. Anastasia had come here for a reason. Everything was calculated for many years ahead. First medical school and then an institute in New York. There was a place to live. Nayli's friend had been living in Unity for a year, renting an apartment. Anastasia had come to stay with her. Nayli had gone to the city with the same plans as Anastasia to study nursing, but apparently the plans had changed drastically. Nayli was surprisingly good-looking. Her mom wanted her daughter to study music. It seemed to her that the work of a music teacher in kindergarten is the best that a girl can dream of. I play songs to the children. Always warm, clean, not like on the farm. Nayli did not want to study. She skipped classes, but she almost finished music school. Now that incomplete education came in handy. She worked as a singer in the coolest, if truth be told, the only restaurant in town. She made more money than any nurse could ever dream of. She used the money to rent an apartment and lived quite well. Nayli was surrounded by suitors of all colors, young and not so young, single and married. An intelligent doctor of the local hospital, middle-class officials and outright gangsters. She gave no advances to anyone and learned to blow them off, especially the persistent ones. Directly, but not offensively. So far, there had been no conflicts, but Nayli realized it was only for a while. She dreamed of a prince on a white horse. In the current realities, an oligarch with his own airplane, with a bag of money, who would take her to New York, shoot a music video and make her a star. It would be good if he was not old, bald, fat wallet with ears, but young and handsome. Basically someone to love. When Anastasia arrived, Naley had such a prince on the horizon. A delegation of investors came to the steel mill. Among them was the owner of several engineering plants in Texas. He was relatively young, about 45 years old. Athletic figure, light gray hair. Lived in New York, called Naley with him, promised a music video, a career, a secure life. Of course, she believed him. There was one major drawback: he was married, but Naley was sure it wouldn't last long. They'd come to New York, live together. He'd get a divorce, leave his wife so much that she wouldn't object. Anastasia didn't like her friend's decision. Naley, think again. Look at him, so well-fed. Stately hands, hard eyes. Do you think he'd change his life for you? Why would he? He's got an established life. He knows what he wants. Does he need you now? Well, obviously he's bored. He wants new experiences. And then he won't be able to live without me, said Naley. Every man needs a young, beautiful, talented wife. A normal man needs a wife he loves. He's been with his wife for at least 20 years. That means he loves her. Sleeping with you doesn't mean he wants to leave her. Maybe he doesn't. You think there were no other women before you and he's still with his wife? Doesn't it bother him? Naley grinned. Don't you want to change your mind again? You're like Sigmund Freud in a skirt. You're psychoanalyzing me. Don't psychoanalyze me. I can't stay here. I know it's my own fault. I wanted money, didn't study, went into the restaurant business. And now, if the bandits don't kill me, I'll sing for another 5 years. Then what? And here's a chance. That's the kind of man I need. I love him and I'll do anything to make us together. Don't worry about me, girlfriend, I won't be lost, said Naley. You'll be giving interviews like a star's girlfriend. Oh, Naley, how can you go into the deep end like that? Anastasia objected. I can do a lot more than that. You see, I've paid a year's rent here. Study and wait for news. She left and disappeared. No call, no letter. Anastasia called Naley's mother, but she didn't know anything about her daughter. After college, Anastasia tried to go to college. It didn't work out. Okay, next year, she decided. In the meantime, she returned to Springbrook. The hospital's chief of staff was happy to hire her to work in the surgery department. Anastasia loved her job. She had never felt so needed, so important. She also liked the attention of the young surgeon, Denial, who was far from professional. They spent a lot of time together. He asked Anastasia out on dates, walked her home after work. But Anastasia felt he was a little too proper. He had everything figured out, everything in order. A man of reason, but not of feeling. I suppose that helped in a surgeon's job, but girls want something a little different. So when Denial met her at the door with flowers and said, Anastasia, we know each other well, we work together, I love you. I think it's time we got married. Anastasia did not find what to answer, sincerely asked. Marry? Why? Now? Denial was dumbfounded. Why? Don't you understand? You and I are a good couple. We're good friends. It's too early to say couple. I'm sorry, but thanks for the flowers. I'll see you at work. In New York, the son of steel mill owner Andrew was having fun. He organized a contemporary art exhibition in an old abandoned factory. Today was the opening. Strange constructions made of plastic tubes, iron rods, cast iron pipes were called installations. To hang pictures on the walls, you had to have animal intuition. Only the author knows where the top and the bottom are. However, no one in this crowd cared about art. They had been drinking, judging by their condition, for a long time. And some of them, apparently, not only drank. Music was blaring. Multicolored laser beams pierced the space, and painted girls were knocked down. It had been going on for about 5 hours when Andrew's father, Dan Belton, and his guards came in. After getting drunk, MS, something went dancing around the tables. Andrew doused her with champagne and from his 2 girlfriends on him. Dan stared at the whole scene for a couple minutes. Then he commanded security. Get this one in the car. As they dragged Andrew to the car, he yelled, Dad, are you interested in art too? Aren't you the investment tracker? In the morning, Everyone tiptoed around the Bilton house. Dan was angry. I gave you money to buy the plant. You bought the plant, and you're setting it up like this. Just because you gave me money doesn't mean I have to fulfill your conditions. You can't demand obedience from a man for money. You can't demand obedience from a man, but with a son who lives his life with painted girls, can you? Listen to me carefully. You're a member of the board of directors of our holding company. If you don't start working, I'll kick you out, you'll be out of money. And all your ugly antics will go away by themselves. I'm giving you one last chance. I'm flying to Pittsburgh tonight. They'll meet you there and take you to Springbrook. There's a problem at the mill. Can you decide if you want to stay on the board? No. You're no longer part owner or heir. What you do for a living is none of my business. Andrew didn't care about the metallurgical plant and its problems, as well as about modern art. But he didn't dare to disobey his father. He didn't believe that his father would disinherit him and kick him out of the house. But he could limit the money, and Andrew did not want to be limited. Accustomed to the fact that nothing to himself, his favorite, do not refuse. There were indeed problems at the plant. He could not work at full capacity because of too old, worn-out equipment. Some of the equipment had to be replaced urgently. This required a lot of money. Andrew had to conduct a technical expertise, calculate the costs, and justify the necessity of these expenses to the board of directors. He spent all his days at the plant, studying the situation, making notes, taking photographs, making calculations, writing reports. Andrew had already figured out what kind of modernization needed to be done. Now he had to convince the board of directors. He suddenly liked to do a necessary and important thing, on which depended the fate of not only the plant but the entire city. Besides, he couldn't forget the dismissive tone with which Dan's father had spoken to him. He made no secret of the fact that he considered his son worthless. Andrew was assigned to Master Benjamin, whom everyone called simply Bilton. It seemed to be to help to drive around the factory, to show, to advise. In fact, Bilton had another task: to look after the young master. You know things are falling apart around here, he said. It's just a matter of time before something collapses. And he's climbing all over the place. I don't want anything to happen. And it did happen. A crane jammed in the spill shop, and a ladle with molten metal hovered at a height of 6 meters. In the shop, besides the workers, were Andrew and Alex Bilton. When they heard the horrible scraping of tearing metal and saw the ladle swaying, the workers rushed to the exit. If the bucket slid off its rails and collapsed to the floor, the tons of hot metal would leave no chance for anyone to survive. Bilton rushed for the exit. He looked back to assess what was happening. He saw Andrew frozen in the middle of the shop. He was paralyzed. He looked up in horror at the tilting bucket and didn't move. Bilton screamed. At that moment, he could not remember a single censorious word and ran back into the shop to his frozen colleague, picked him up in an armful and dragged him toward the exit. Andrew came to his senses. They ran to the open doors of the shop and were about to run out. But then, with a terrible rumble, something collapsed. Metal debris fell, sparks. The whole place was covered with vapor. Bilton pushed Andrew in the back with both hands. He flew out of the shop. Bilton was not in time. A metal beam collapsed on him. The foreman was unconscious but alive. The beam had crushed the left side of his body. Everyone struggled together to lift the beam. When the ambulance arrived, Bilton had already been carried out of the shop. Andrew arrived at the hospital and learned that Bilton's leg and arm were badly injured, with broken bones in his leg. It was not life-threatening, but the shattered arm had been decided to be amputated. Andrew burst into the surgeon's office. Denial. Why amputation? Isn't there anything you can do? We can save his life, but not his arm. I'm not a neurosurgeon. We don't have that kind of specialist. There's a Jake Rivers at the regional hospital. He might be able to save the arm, but it's doubtful. So take him to the regional hospital. It's 150 kilometers away. Bilton can't be transported. He won't make it. We have 2 hours left. If we don't operate in 2 hours, he'll die. Don't interfere. Let him get ready. Amputation is a complicated operation, and I've never done it before. But don't start early. Give me 2 hours. Andrew was already running out of the office. He jumped into a sports car and drove out of town, raced down the highway at top speed. On the highway, the policeman saw the speeding car, pointed his radar, saw the speed figures and rushed to his car, but then changed his mind to catch up with the offender. 45 minutes later, Andrew's car flew into the parking lot of the regional hospital. A man in a doctor's coat was smoking at the entrance. "Whose car is River's car here?" Andrew asked. "How do you think you other doctors can earn money for one of these?" The man irritably threw away his cigarette and went inside. Andrew walked over to River's car and slashed 2 tires with a knife. The alarm sounded. A couple minutes later, a man in a green surgical suit jumped out onto the porch. He ran up to the car, saw the flat tires. "Assholes." "It's not the first time this has happened," he turned to Andrew. "I just got here. We need to call a tire service. I don't have my phone with me. How far is it from here?" "No, a couple blocks." "Let me give you a ride. I'm gonna have to wait here anyway." Jake looked at his watch, thought for a second and got in the car. They pulled out of the parking lot. Andrew pressed the gas pedal and the car sped off. "Where are you going?" "The tire repair shop is down the road." "What are you doing?" "Pull over." Jake grabbed the door handle. "You want to jump out? Look at the speedometer." That's how a man in Jacksonville is going to have his arm amputated in an hour. You're the only one who can help him. You help him, and then you're going to sue me. Are you insane? Did you slash the tires too? I have a scheduled surgery in 3 hours. The patient's ready to go. Can we make it? Couldn't you have explained it properly? What if you didn't agree? I don't have time for explanations and persuasions. Of course I wouldn't have agreed. Can you drive any faster? At the hospital, Bilton's wife, eyes swollen with tears, grabbed Denial's hands, demanded immediate surgery. What are you waiting for? Let him be without an arm, but alive. Denial stalled, realizing the risk of the situation. 15 minutes. We can't wait any longer. It's time. Jake entered the hall and went straight to the operating room. The operation lasted 2 hours. There was complete silence under the operating room door. No talking, no sobbing. They waited tensely. A tired Jake came out, slowly pulled his cap off his head, looked around at the waiting people. He's alive, and his arm was saved. But I can't say now how much of its functionality will return. We have to wait. He found Andrew with his eyes. Where's the car? Let's go. Jake got out and Andrew was intercepted by Bilton's wife. Thank you. I sure don't have anything to thank you for. I didn't save him. He got me out of trouble. The next day, Andrew went to the hospital to find out about the master's condition, if he needed help. In Denial's office, a pretty brunette with dark blue, almost black eyes was filling out cards. Hello. Where's your surgeon? Hello, Andrew. You know me. Since yesterday in the hospital, only talk about you. Everyone's wondering why a Jacksonville resident would rush to the rescue. Bilton went to the region. Seriously, they think you were trying to make up for the mill being in this condition because of you. But you saved Bilton. Without your help, he would have been crippled. Anastasia, can I take you out for coffee? How do you know my name? I've heard it, a beautiful nurse named Anastasia. But I'm sorry, it's just a joke. It's on my name-a-tag. The affair was moving fast. Anastasia didn't expect this from herself. She fell in love. It was strange to her that she was seriously contemplating marriage to Denial. Positive and love dependable. You don't need anything when you have someone you love. Their family had a home in every town where Andrew Holdings mills were located. How else if they had to visit often? You couldn't stay in hotels, could you? Andrew's cottage in Jacksonville stood outside the city in the village of Sosnovy Bor. It was an upscale community. It was modest by big city standards. By local standards, you can't make an honest day's work. Life in prison. Anastasia moved in with Andrew. A couple months later, he told his parents the good news: I'm getting married. Mom didn't appreciate the joy. Anastasia frightened that her son will marry at the drop of a hat to an unknown person. She decided to come and set him straight. But Nayli suddenly arrived before Mom. When she called, Andrew couldn't believe it. Nayli was found. He rushed to the city to the old apartment, and in half an hour already hugged a thin, pale, and some kind of devastated friend. He wanted to know why she'd disappeared, how she'd been living, why she'd come back. Anastasia hadn't been able to find out anything. Nayli had just entered the apartment, suddenly grabbed her stomach and collapsed unconscious. Anastasia called an ambulance, went with her to the hospital. She asked for surgery. They wouldn't let her in. Not your shift. Then she spent the night in the emergency room with her friend. When it was clear that Nayli was all right, I went home to sleep it off. Here's Nayli's story, which she finally got to tell Anastasia. You know, Anastasia, New York is a fairy tale. As it turns out, sometimes a scary one. No, it really is a fairy tale in the beginning. I even made a music video. Haven't you seen it? I mean, not a lot of people have seen this cheap video on a little known channel. Yeah, shopping, restaurants. He took me around like a doll, bragged to all these rich people, then locked me up. No, you can go anywhere, but there's nowhere to go. No friends, no money, constant humiliation. Where are you gonna go? I'll kick you out of your apartment. Where will you go if you don't obey? You're in luck. You live in New York, you don't have to work. I feed you, I clothe you. I wanted to leave. It was so disgusting, but it turned out I was pregnant. He didn't want kids on the side. You can't imagine the humiliation of begging him on my knees, let's keep the baby. Let go and I'll leave. I'll raise it myself. You know what he said? I don't need leverage. You'll be begging me for money your whole life. He wouldn't let me go for a minute. Took me to the doctor himself to get an abortion. He was afraid I'd run away. When I was recovering from the abortion, he came to me, criticized me for being so careless, and immediately demanded intimacy. Anyway, I waited until he was asleep, took his credit card and ran away. Withdrew everything I had on the account, $120,000. I'm supposed to get something out of this bastard, right? Let's just say he paid me for all my unborn children. Nayli, that's not accurate. Don't say that, you know yourself. You'll still have children, Anastasia replied. It was hard for Anastasia to be torn between Nayli and Andrew. Her friend needed help to recover, to find a job. She lay all day long with her face pressed against the wall. I don't need anything. Life is over. We should have introduced her to some young man. Obviously, Nayli didn't want to hear about it, but it had to be done gently, casually. They say you drive a wedge with a wedge. On the other hand, Andrew needed her attention. He wanted to be welcomed home with a delicious dinner and always in a good mood. Where could he get it if his anxiety about Nayli didn't recede? And the job was hard too, and he couldn't relax. And then her mother arrived to inspect the bride. Somehow Anastasia had forgotten all about her. She should have. The future mother-in-law should always be remembered. Olga Petrovna was a beautiful, well-groomed woman with the look and behavior of a queen. She tried to be friendly when she met her, but Anastasia clearly didn't like her too dismissive a look and a luscious grin in her address. Sweetheart, she called her in no other way, as if she were talking to a maid. In the evening, Anastasia accidentally overheard Olga Petrovna talking to her son. Andrew, have you known this girl for long? Already 6 months, a considerable period of time, and the girl is nothing. So you fell for it, and fell for it, said the mother. I love her, replied Andrew. Funny. All your love, I have always been across the road. Remember how many times I had to smooth things over, apologize. But at least there were girls from decent families. What's this? You had to leave New York to pick up a nurse. Mom, Anastasia's having a baby. Oh, great. That's a burden. Just because she's having a baby, even if it's yours, doesn't make her part of our family. She'll never be, don't you see? She's not just a hick, she's a redneck. Don't be crazy. Why would you marry her? You'll run away sooner or later, and you'll have to deal with the baby story for the rest of your life. I think Dad will be the same opinion. Of course, answered Andrew. I can't get married without Dad's approval. I can't do anything myself. I'm a worthless appendage to Papa's greatness. If you don't like my future wife so much, you don't have to talk to her. Don't, as you put it, bring her into the family. We'll live in Brooklyn. Do you hear yourself? You in Brooklyn. I've told you everything. You do what you want. Mark my words, this is not going to end well. You're always welcome, but please don't bring your nurse. And that's how short and to the point the Queen Mom's visit was. Anastasia really was pregnant. She found out a week ago. Anastasia had not even had time to decide on her attitude to this event. On the one hand, of course, joy from the expectation of serious changes in life. On the other hand, she's worried that things are moving so fast. She loves Andrew, but they are so short together. Not everyone knows about each other. Now he's had a fight with his family and has chosen her. But for all his ostensible independence, he lives in the family house, works at his father's factory, is a co-owner of the holding company, and clearly does not burn with the desire to leave the board of directors and transfer his shares to his father. Andrew at any moment can return to the family, not to her. There is no other way out, and there is no hope that the family's attitude towards her will ever change either. Since with the blessing of the family did not work out, they decided to do without a wedding, just signed. Anastasia's mother Nelly and an engineer from the Combine, with whom Andrew became friends, came to visit. Nelly was very wary of Andrew. Anastasia, aren't you being a little hasty? New Yorkers are either gangsters or scumbags. Often both. Okay, don't listen to me, you know I'm talking about mine. You're gonna be fine. You should be happy for the two of us, she said. Anastasia was happy for the two of them, for the five of them. Happy. And she had it all. Andrew was living in a house she'd never even imagined in her dreams, and she was expecting a baby with the man she loved, the best man in the world. When the doctors from the ultrasound room said that it will be a boy, Andrew and Joy threw a party at home. Without warning, Anastasia fell into the house with a large drunken company. Half of the guests she saw for the first time. Some strange young men with different manners and girls in revealing outfits and provocative laughter. Anastasia, with her already noticeable belly, didn't fit in. She felt awkward and uncomfortable. In the morning, she tried to talk to Andrew, but he was unable to explain anything. Then he apologized for a long time, kissed her hands, swore he would never do it again. I've been here almost a year, very tired. Constant problems at the factory. Sorry, I snapped, said Andrew. I don't even understand how I could bring all these people here. They're not my friends, don't get me wrong. They're just casual acquaintances. I'm so ashamed that I've upset you. My darling, darling, I promised you'd be happy. Believe me, I will be. What was Anastasia supposed to do? Just trust. What's the big deal? Tired, drunk, doesn't remember throwing that party. Nothing bad happened. Everything went on as before. Andrew worked. Anastasia tried to arrange home comfort and prepared for the birth of the child. He was attentive and loving, the perfect husband. Anastasia couldn't believe herself that she was so lucky. A son was born, named Benjamin. Nelly wondered, what kind of name is that? Where did they find it? I don't like it. The next year, Anastasia even remembered with difficulty the endless screaming of the child and the constant desire to sleep. One day, Nelly came in, saw her friend completely exhausted, and said, "You won't last that long, Anastasia. You're still a wife to your husband. He'll get over it. Benjamin's asleep. And you go to bed. You need to rest." Anastasia listened and didn't understand. What house, what husband, when her son was finally asleep? Night after night, she walked around the room with the child in her arms, coaxing, singing, rocking. And he cried all the time when he fell asleep. She put him in his crib, sat down on the bed, fell head on the pillow, but did not lift his feet off the floor. Why would she have to get up now anyway? She couldn't sleep. I lay there listening, waiting. There was silence for about 5 minutes. Then he started screaming again, a deafening bass. That's what Anastasia was waiting for. The first scream made her head feel like a switch had been flicked. She jumped up, through a dream that was more like a faint, heard her son's cry, got up, and completely exhausted, took him in her arms and started pacing the room again. It went on like this for 24 hours. "Nelly, when do you go to bed?" Anastasia asked. She couldn't remember. Not just when she was cooking dinner. Ask her when she saw her husband. She wouldn't answer. If Anastasia had been told that children were different sleeping at 3 a.m., then eating, walking, and sleeping again, she wouldn't have believed it. Andrew would take off work, but no rest at home. Do something so he doesn't scream all night, he pleaded. Anastasia didn't respond, she just didn't have the energy. Suddenly, by magic, everything changed. Benjamin was a year old, and it was as if he realized that he couldn't behave like that. He started sleeping at night, stopped screaming. Now they slept at night and walked and played during the day. Anastasia came to her senses and suddenly noticed that her husband was rarely at home. He was also traveling back and forth on business. Anastasia, I'm going to New York. You know, the business of the concern. Don't you miss me here? He kissed Anastasia and his son and drove off. What's there to do? Clutch him and yell, don't leave? Why shouldn't he work? He has to go, even if he's taking a break from them. He's entitled to go. He took a vacation so that the whole country found out about it. For the fight major, the son of a metallurgical magnate, showed all the TV channels. A disgraceful debauch with girls of easy behavior and muzzling. Ended up in a hospital and a criminal case. Bilton Sr. included all his connections, and his son was weaned from prison on the condition that he goes to Las Vegas and in New York does not stick. Andrew had a faint hope that Anastasia didn't know about the scandal, but there was no hiding the truth. When he returned, Anastasia immediately demanded a divorce. Are you serious? What do you think you're doing? Would it be cheaper for me to grab a piece of your fortune and let you live happily ever after? You won't get a penny. I don't want anything. Just get a divorce and Benjamin and I can go to my mom's and you can go wherever you want. Benjamin stays with me with you. What do you need him for? Who reminded you that you have a son? Dad. Am I right? That's right, the stupid son. There's no hope for him. Do you need an heir? How can an empire be lost? Andrew came over and slapped Anastasia hard across the face. She could not resist, got up, wiped the blood with the palm of her hand. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, Anastasia said. Yeah, sell it. But be warned. I'm giving you such conditions you'll have to go to court. You won't get anything. The only condition is that I never see you again. And that's how Anastasia's married life ended. It was painful, hurtful, and completely unclear what to do next. She packed her and Benjamin's things and left for Naley's. Naley was drowning Achilles, but her friend was fully supportive. She was right. She couldn't stay with him. It's only going to get worse. I hope you don't go with the beats means love theory. You'll get a divorce. But don't play the nobleman. You're entitled to a share of the estate. Don't walk away proud and with nothing. I'm sick of these princes. Won't they take my son away from me? Anastasia asked. Why should they? It was your Andrew in the heat of screaming to scare you. What does he need a son for? Anastasia filed for divorce. They didn't get a divorce right away, only through the court, because there's a child. Andrew asked to see her. She said no. She wasn't going to negotiate with him, let alone go back. His father is right. Andrew is really unable to be responsible for anyone, even for himself. Family life is not for him. He tried, but it didn't work. He was quickly deflated. A year, tortured by his wife and screaming child, was enough for the illusion of great love and happiness in marriage dissipated. Tried to be a husband and father, failed. That old life proved more appealing. Anastasia, of course, was worried. She felt like her world had fallen apart. She was going to live a long and happy life with Andrew. Despite the terrible offense she still loved, interrupted her soul with memories of recent happiness, forbade herself to remember, but it turned out badly. She wanted to hide from everyone and surrender to sorrow. But all her days were taken up with the child, no time to suffer. Naley was as supportive as she could be. My darling, you should at least cry. It might make you feel better. But why cry? I've cried and still I feel sick. Are we some kind of defective princes? I told you, but who can learn from other people's experience? But you want your own rake. Come on, what's there to remember now? Said Naley. Aren't you moving forward into a new life? You don't realize how lucky you are. If you had missed for 5 years, you would have tolerated it, forgiven it. There was only one end anyway, and the kid would have grown up by now. You have to explain things to him somehow. Oh, Anastasia, you've suffered a bit. But don't take too long. Yes, your husband was a jerk, but at least you have a son. What a jerk her husband was, Anastasia found out a couple days later. She was served a summons to the court, where the issue of determining the place of residence of the child will be decided. Andrew demanded that the child live with him. Anastasia was in a panic. She didn't understand why Andrew needed a son, but it wasn't like he was going to become a single father and raise a child. If it was his parents' idea, that was strange too. They hadn't seen a grandson in a year, and now they were in love. Or is it because Benjamin's the heir? We should keep him to ourselves. I don't know what his uneducated mother would think. There was no time to look into the reasons, but to decide what to do. The chance of losing the child was real. Anastasia realized she couldn't win the trial. No home, no job, no money, even if she had everything. Suing the rich and powerful Biltons was futile. Anastasia thrashed around the apartment in terror and despair. Her head wasn't working at all. There was only one thought: I won't give it back. I won't give it back. There was no idea how to do it. When Nelly arrived, Anastasia was banging her head against the wall with her son in her arms. Benjamin must have been roaring for a long time. Nelly couldn't get him out of her friend's arms. She was hysterical. Having calmed the child down, Nelly sent Anastasia to the kitchen with Valerian and gradually found out what had happened. Nelly, won't they take my son away from me? Anastasia asked with desperation. I can't live without him. They'll take him away and I won't see him again. Anastasia's eyes were so frightening to look at. I won't give him back, she repeated. Calm down, said Nelly. Stop being hysterical. If you get that hysterical in court, they'll put you in the hospital. Calm down, said Nelly. Let's think about what to do. We need a good lawyer. Only there are no such lawyers here. We can't afford a Moscow one. No, that's silly. The Biltons will have a better lawyer anyway. Jesus, Nelly, what lawyers? Anastasia exclaimed in despair. I can't win this trial with neither money nor lawyers. We have to hide somewhere so they won't find us. We'll leave. We'll run away. If I don't show up in court, they won't rule in my favor. Whether you show up or not doesn't matter. They'll win. We'll leave. We just have to think about where. We can't go to my mom's. They'll find me. I don't have anyone else. Do you realize that if you run away, they'll be looking for you? Nelly asked. Are you going to hide for the rest of your life? Then you have to go somewhere where they won't find you. There was no logic in Anastasia's words. What logic if your thoughts were scattering like cockroaches and you couldn't put them together? But her intuition was screaming to run. Until morning they sat, going over the options, sometimes very absurd. They couldn't go to Moscow. They couldn't go home either. Abroad, it's even from the realm of fantasy. They tried all their relatives and friends. No, we can't. It's too obvious they'll find it. And then Nelly remembered that her grandmother had a friend, Aunt Carla. Nelly knew her a little, having traveled with her grandmother a few times as a child. Carla lived in some remote village. Nelly remembered it had been a long drive. About 5 years ago, Aunt Carla had died. She was a lonely woman. Why didn't she have a family? Nelly had never wondered. She'd left her house to a friend. She had children and grandchildren in case she needed it. Her mother once said that the neighbor's daughter lives in the house now. Let her live there. The house is empty. I can't afford to sell it. And why sell it? It's worth a penny. Let it be for a rainy day. That's where we should go, said Nelly. And that rainy day came. The Biltons aren't digging. They're nobody's relatives. I'll call my mom in the morning and find out where to go. Only the village is out of the way. The bus doesn't go there. I remember it took me and my grandmother about an hour to walk down some country road. But we always went in the summer, Nelly said. An hour on the road isn't too bad, is it? What about with Alex in your arms in the cold? They clear the road, of course, and they take groceries to the store. The ambulance comes. I remember my grandmother asking me, how do you live here in winter? And Aunt Carla said it's not always possible to get out. But they don't go to town every day. When the road's cleaned, they go. Oh, Anastasia, we've got the wrong idea, Nelly exclaimed. Scared to let you go? I'm afraid to stay here. I'm a country girl. I'm used to wandering in the woods. And the fact that it's in the middle of nowhere, with no roads or communications, is even better. Call your mom. Tell her to give you the address. Thank you, Nayli. This really is the way out. We'll stay there and see what happens, Anastasia said. Anastasia's mind cleared, her panic receding. She began to pack for the trip, folding her clothes, taking the warmest ones. She couldn't carry much. She withdrew the rest of her salary and allowance from her card. When would she ever see an ATM again? Nayli got the address. The village of Barikrik. What a nice, bright, optimistic name. Anastasia was so afraid for her son that she was ready to go right away. Nayli talked her out of it. Calm down. We'll call and see when the bus is, she said. You're in a hurry today. You can go tomorrow. Nayli, don't tell me where it is. You're the only one who needs to know. Don't worry, friend, we'll get through this, said Nayli, even though she was feeling a little wary. She knew that running away was not an option. The police would be looking for her, not only the Biltons, but also the Biltons. But Anastasia saw no other way to stay with her son. It's scary, but without a son, life would be over. So she must flee. Doubt is a useful thing, but not now. It's done. Let's go, Anastasia said. The bus left Stoneville Station at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was just over 200 kilometers to the village, so she would be at the road that led to the village around 5. It gets dark early in the winter, but it's still light at 5 p.m. If it's still an hour to the village, we should get there by daylight. That's good. I wouldn't want to wander through the woods in the dark. They say there are wolves here, Nayli said in a shaky voice. Anastasia had Alex in her arms and her bag on her shoulder. She got on the bus. It was old, rattling, forced, and most unpleasantly, poorly heated. After an hour on the bus, Anastasia realized she was freezing. Her feet were especially cold. The metal floor of the bus was about the same temperature as outside the window, about 25 degrees. She tried to lift her legs, but she couldn't stand it for long and put them down. Pulled her jacket out of her bag and covered Alex. A blizzard had started. There was a shroud of snow in front of the bus, swirling back and forth. Anastasia didn't understand how the driver could see the road, but they kept driving. She raised and lowered her frozen feet, wiggled her toes in her boots. Time passed, and more hours later, when she was stiff, the bus stopped. Who wants to go to Berry Creek? The driver asked. You see the clearing between the trees, that's where you go. Why isn't anyone meeting you? Good luck, then. We're fine, Anastasia said. Thank you. The bus left. Anastasia wrapped her scarf tighter, put her bag back on, and walked on. The road must not have been cleaned today or yesterday. There was a lot of snow, and it was hard to walk. The blizzard was hitting her face, making her eyes water and coating her eyelashes with ice. Alex was asleep. Anastasia prayed he wouldn't wake up for much longer. If he woke up and cried, he'd swallow the frosty air and might get sick. She tried to walk faster. It would start to get dark soon. Anastasia walked slower and slower with fatigue. It seemed to her that she had been walking for quite some time. The village was around here somewhere. There was nothing to see because of the snowstorm. It was getting dark. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. Shielding Alex from the snow, she walked on and on. It seemed to her that she was lost, but it was impossible to stop, and the village kept disappearing. Suddenly there was a howl or a bark. A shadow flashed between the trees. Wolves. Anastasia threw her bag off her shoulder and tried to run. The snow was deep and sticky. She fell, covering her son. The wolf didn't pounce for some reason. He sat down next to her. Anastasia raised her head. They say there are wolves here, Nayli said in a shaky voice. Anastasia had Alex in her arms and her bag on her shoulder. She got on the bus. It was old, rattling, forced, and most unpleasantly poorly heated. After an hour on the bus, Anastasia realized she was freezing. Her feet were especially cold. The metal floor of the bus was about the same temperature as outside the window, about 25 degrees. She tried to lift her legs, but she couldn't stand it for long and put them down. Pulled her jacket out of her bag and covered Alex. A blizzard had started. There was a shroud of snow in front of the bus, swirling back and forth. Anastasia didn't understand how the driver could see the road, but they kept driving. She raised and lowered her frozen feet, wiggled her toes in her boots. Time passed, and more hours later, when she was stiff, the bus stopped. "Who wants to go to Berry Creek?" The driver asked. "You see the clearing between the trees, that's where you go. Why isn't anyone meeting you?" "Good luck, then." "We're fine," Anastasia said. "Thank you." The bus left. Anastasia wrapped her scarf tighter, put her bag back on, and walked on. The road must not have been cleaned today or yesterday. There was a lot of snow, and it was hard to walk. The blizzard was hitting her face, making her eyes water and coating her eyelashes with ice. Alex was asleep. Anastasia prayed he wouldn't wake up for much longer. If he woke up and cried, he'd swallow the frosty air and might get sick. She tried to walk faster. It would start to get dark soon. Anastasia walked slower and slower with fatigue. It seemed to her that she had been walking for quite some time. The village was around here somewhere. There was nothing to see because of the snowstorm. It was getting dark. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. Shielding Alex from the snow, she walked on and on. It seemed to her that she was lost. But it was impossible to stop, and the village kept disappearing. Suddenly there was a howl or a bark. A shadow flashed between the trees. Wolves. Anastasia threw her bag off her shoulder and tried to run. The snow was deep and sticky. She fell, covering her son. The wolf didn't pounce for some reason. He sat down next to her. Anastasia lifted her head. It wasn't the wolf's shadow, but a large white dog. It stood up, barked, waved its muzzle somewhere forward, and ran away. It was useless to look for the bag in this blizzard, so Anastasia followed the dog. A light flickered ahead. She walked toward it, barely moving her numb legs and holding Alex tightly against her so she wouldn't drop him. The light burned, and she walked toward it. Gradually, it took on the outline of a window, and around it the outline of a house began to show through the blizzard. "My God, there are people there," she thought with relief. Anastasia staggered up onto the porch and tried to knock on the door with her hand. Without realizing if it succeeded, she became completely exhausted and slowly slid down the wall. She must have knocked because a man's silhouette appeared in the window. He put his hand to the glass, trying to see who was knocking. Seeing no one, he went to the door. When he opened it, he found a woman lying there, cradling a baby. That she was alive was clear. She had just knocked. Apparently, she had just passed out from the cold. The man picked her up along with the boy in his arms and carried her into the house. Anastasia woke up. It was so nice and peaceful. Suddenly, memories of the snow, the woods, the dog whirled through her mind. Alex. Alice, my son. She opened her eyes in alarm. There were wooden walls all around. She was lying on the bed, covered with a warm blanket. "Well, sweetie, you're awake," said the woman sitting at the table, about 60 years old, with a kind face and a soft look. "That's good. And my son is asleep. He has already eaten, taken a walk. Now he sleeps. Don't get up yet. I'll bring you some herbal tea. Don't worry, no one will hurt you here." "Where am I? Is that Berry Creek?" Anastasia asked, looking around. "Not quite," the woman replied. "Let's have some tea first, and then I'll tell you all about it." Anastasia drank the tea and looked around. The house was nice and warm. There was a staircase to the second floor on the side. Everything looked very cozy: fabrics, carpets, sturdy old furniture. A harem, not a house, she thought. Strange. Where in the woods would such a little house come from? "So you were going to Berry Creek?" the woman asked. "Who are you going to?" "I am from Berry Creek myself, but I have not seen you before," Anastasia answered. "Did you know Aunt Nina? The owners of her house let me stay there." "Yes, it's a nice house. You can live there," agreed Anastasia Smith. "But something must have happened to you. If you haven't gotten to people yet. Misha found you alive on the porch yesterday. A man doesn't go out in the cold to look for a village he's never been to, and with a baby in his arms. And the village isn't far, only you've gone off the road. It's good that you found us. You're in the gamekeeper's house, though here he is a gamekeeper, a forester and a hunter," she continued. "He has a house in Pesky, but he is rarely there, so he lives here. Call me Anastasia Smith." "What's your name?" "I'm Anastasia," replied the guest. "Well, Anastasia, you rest now, and I'll go and cook dinner," said Anastasia Smith and looked out of the window. Oh, here comes Misha. The front door slammed. Someone shook the snow off their clothes and boots. There was the sound of outerwear being removed. Anna's heart raced. The owner of the house would be coming in now. Maybe he didn't want uninvited guests. Who would want a woman and child slumped on the porch in a semi-fainting state? Anastasia was worried, as if her fate depended on how the stranger treated her. She had not come to live with him. She would take Alex and go to the village. But this house seemed so cozy, and Anastasia Smith had treated them so warmly. She didn't want it to end right now. A tall, stout man entered the room. He smelled of frosty air. He walked to the stove, leaned his back against it, and turned to Anastasia Mikhailovna. "How is it? Have the lost guests come to their senses?" Then he looked back at Anna. His eyes were merry and kind. With a smile, he asked, "How did you scare yesterday?" "I didn't expect guests. By the way, I found your bag in the woods." He went out the door and came back with Anna's bag. "Is it yours?" "Yes, it's mine. I lost it when I was running from the wolf," she exclaimed with relief. The dog seemed so big and white. "That's our Tuzik," laughed the man. Anastasia laughed heartily with him. "That's not how you associate a nickname with a huge dog." "Well, he's Tuzik. A big and smart dog." They were making mincemeat. Alex was crawling on the floor, humming something, rattling toys. "Anya, you call me Aunt Rose," said Rosalie. "Or while you say Anastasia Smith, you'll break your tongue. Only Matthew calls me by my first name and middle name." "Why is that?" Anastasia asked. "Is he your son or grandson?" "Neither. He's my student. I've worked at the school for almost 40 years. All the villagers are my students. 3 years ago, I was all alone. In an instant, no one was left. My daughter, son-in-law, and grandson died in a car accident. My life was over too. I didn't know how to go on living. I didn't leave the house. I didn't let anyone in. Matthew sat outside my house all night long, consoling me, telling me to eat, forcing me to eat. When I came to my senses, he brought me here. He said he couldn't do it alone. That's how I live. I go to the village for a couple of weeks. Then I come back here again. I can't do without this house, and I can't do without Matthew. So decide who he is to me." Wiping away her tears, Anastasia hugged Rosalie. Her heart clenched with pity for the woman, for Matthew, for herself. Rosalie cried too, and hugged Anastasia. She had suddenly told her story, deciding that these people had a right to know how she had come to be with them. They wouldn't hurt or offend. Matthew came home to find Rosalie and Anastasia hugging each other and wiping away tears. Alex was moving from one to the other, and he had a face that made it look like he was going to cry too. There were unfinished dumplings on the table. "What's wrong?" Matthew asked, picking Alex up and walking over to the women. 2 pairs of crying eyes looked at him. Then the women sighed, wiped away their tears, and continued making dumplings. Matthew demanded an explanation. After dinner, they had a big council. Anastasia told them everything again. They began to think of ways to help her. "Anya, do you know how the trial ended?" Rosalie asked. "I don't know, but I'm guessing," said Anastasia. "No, you have to know for sure," Rosalie insisted. "We'd better look at the papers. They must have been sent to you," said Rosalie. "There's nothing we can do now. Give me Nayli's address and phone number. I'll go into town tomorrow and find out. Don't worry. I'll make sure that no one knows that anyone is interested in your case. I'll also find out if anyone's looking for you." "All right, girls, it's too early to worry. Let's sleep. And we'll worry tomorrow," Matthew added. Matthew left in the morning. Anastasia hoped that the news wouldn't be too bad. She didn't really believe Matthew would be able to find out anything, though. Rosalie watched her floundering, then suddenly said, "Don't you doubt it, Matthew will find out. He's a forester, of course, but he wasn't always one. He has an excellent law degree. He went to school in New York, then opened a law firm with a friend. He's a good lawyer, as they say nowadays, a lawyer with a name. True, he married very badly, His wife ruined his life so badly that he left the office to his friend and came here to lick his wounds. But he's appreciated. He's got people coming here asking for help. So he still has connections. He'll figure it out, you bet he will. Anastasia's head was a mess. How could this be? Running away from home, nearly freezing in the woods, and ending up at the home of a famous lawyer. It didn't work that way. She got dressed and walked out of the house. Gotta breathe, look at the trees and the sky, come to her senses. If it's true, there's hope. Anya, come and have a look. Rosalie called out. Anastasia ran into the house. Alex was standing in the middle of the room, waving his arms, staggering, but standing. He took a step, fell to all fours. "Oh my God, he's gone," Anastasia exclaimed. It was such boundless happiness that all the troubles somehow faded and fell away. It was as if Anastasia had grown wings, an unjustified but unshakable confidence. No one could ever take her child away from her. She'd bite everyone. She wouldn't give up her son. We were waiting for Matthew. Our lives depended on his news. It wasn't just words, they were. And if Alex, because of his young age, or rather 1 year of living, didn't get into the situation, Anastasia waited for Matthew with bated breath. Matthew arrived late in the afternoon, came in, took off his jacket, walked to the table, sat down. Rosalie, Anastasia hovered around him. They didn't have the courage to ask. "Were you expecting me?" Matthew intrigued when he realized he couldn't go any further. "I'm going to get beaten up." He spoke. Exhale. "It's not that bad." The trial went ahead. Andrew had a lawyer brought in from New York, but for some reason the local judge wasn't too scared. Maybe he didn't take the New Yorkers' pressure seriously. Or maybe he thought that in front of them will not give up. Anyway, the court ruled that the child must live with his father. But the execution is on hold pending questioning of the mother, which is you, Anastasia. You have 1 month to appear in court. In a month, if you don't appear in court, the judgment will take effect. You'll be wanted, and then they'll file for termination of parental rights. "What good is that?" Anastasia asked. "You have a month. In a month, you have to prove that you can raise a child. You have to have a job, a place to live, money for child support. Ideally, a full family." "That's great. You've got it all," Anastasia said wryly. "No, I have a job. I'm on maternity leave. I work at the hospital, but no place to live, no money, no husband." "Listen, your Nayli is a tough cookie. Andrew's nose is digging up the ground. They're looking for you. They visit her every other day, hoping you'll show up. And she's like, 'I don't know anything. Leave me alone.' She wouldn't talk to me, but I convinced her. I'm charming and honest." Matthew chuckled. "She's a beauty too, Anastasia. Rosalie's a supermodel out there." Rosalie hummed. "Which is better than me. But of course not as good, but beautiful. Almost like Anastasia." "Wow. Is that a compliment?" "It's kind of out of time, but it's nice." Anastasia smiled. As expected, the Andrews won the trial. They got the baby back, but somehow there's no despair. Somehow it feels like everything can be changed. Because Matthew believes in it. Well, if he believes it, she'll believe it too. Anastasia realized she couldn't do anything on her own. All she could do was trust Matthew. Anastasia couldn't sleep at night. The thought of marrying Daniel came to mind. She wondered if she could ask Daniel for help. Didn't he love her? Ask her to marry him? Of course, he'd had his own life for a long time. But a sham marriage could be arranged. She'd have a place to live and a husband to sue for her son. And then they'd divorce. Wouldn't he want to help? "We should tell Matthew in the morning." Sounds like a good option. "Anastasia, are you out of your mind?" Matthew questioned. "What if your Daniel is married? Even if he isn't, he has a girl he loves. Of course he's a noble man, he won't refuse you, but he won't ruin a man's life. I'm sure if he's single, he'll help a friend in distress. And if he still loves you, are you ready to marry him for real? If not, forget it." Anastasia sighed. "But I don't have any other ideas. You know, if there's no other way out, I'll marry you myself. Not for real, of course. I'm not married. I don't have a mistress. No one will get hurt. Let's leave that option for last resort. Forget about Daniel. The next day, Matthew had a visitor, a young, beautiful girl. She came on foot, apparently from the village. "Matthew, you haven't been here for a long time. I've been waiting and waiting, so I thought I'd see if anything was wrong," Rosalie cooed. "Oh, there is. Matthew's getting married." He laughed. "Here's the bride, Anastasia. Come here." Anastasia came down from the second floor with the baby in her arms. "That's how the young and foolish love each other," Rosalie sighed. "What happened there? I do not tell me on stupidity and split up. She didn't even tell me about the baby. Matthew brought them here as soon as he found out. He's a bit of a mess now. Think about it. The woman you love is back. And he's got a son." They were both speechless when one left, the other outraged. "Rose, why are you lying? Imagine there's no normal men in the village. There's only my Matthew, and he lives in Biryakovo. All the unmarried women are making plans for him. He's had a hard time fighting them off. I barely got out. I wasn't lazy to drag him through the woods. And he doesn't want it. He doesn't like anyone." Anastasia said thoughtfully. "Only you, Matthew. I can see he's got a twinkle in his eye. Don't you like him at all?" Carla continued. "A fake marriage to avoid losing the baby is certainly a solution. But I'm afraid it's going to kill him. It's not what he's hoping for." Oh, how Anastasia's heart ached. She liked Matthew, liked him too much. But you can't go from fire and brimstone to fire and brimstone. She'd been married once before. And this is just a few weeks' acquaintance. No one's ever proposed and asked me to marry her so quietly. You're dreaming. It's an empty fantasy, nothing more. Another week passed, and now the guest didn't show up. So who wasn't expected, he just showed up. There was a knock at the door. Rosalie opened it. On the threshold stood a young man dressed in a dapper, metropolitan appearance. Rosalie knew at once who it was. She tried to slam the door shut, but he pushed it open and stepped inside. "Anastasia, I know you're here. Come out, we need to talk." "Andrew, how did you find me?" "I gotta hand it to you, you hid pretty well. We barely figured out that your Nelly, or rather her mom, has a house in Biryakovo, but no one saw you there. We found a kind woman who told us that a young woman with a child, like the gamekeeper's wife, lives in the gamekeeper's house. Here I've come to see if we have one wife for two." He threw the papers in front of Anastasia. "You can't hide anymore. Here's a subpoena. If you don't show up, you'll lose the baby, even though there's already a judgment. They just want to observe all the formalities and see the mother in court. I suggest you don't go to court and sign all the papers. I've got it right here." Anastasia exclaimed indignantly. "Do you seriously think I will give up my son voluntarily?" "Then you don't give him up voluntarily. You don't have a chance. And don't you dare run away again. I'll find you. I'll see you in court." What a scoundrel. Rosalie, who had been silent all this time, couldn't stand it. He needs a child, and he didn't even ask how he was, if he was sick. Carla looked sympathetically at Anastasia. Suddenly needing something? He's so bored he didn't even ask to see it. Anastasia, you can imagine he didn't even want to see it. She's fighting for him in court. "Give me the baby. How did you manage to marry someone like that?" "I don't know," Anastasia said sadly. "Aunt Rose was stupid. She wouldn't listen to her mom." They talked as if Andrew wasn't here about him, but without him. Andrew looked at them perplexed. Have they gone completely crazy? And went out, loudly slamming the door. "That's it now. Now only the trial, in which everything is already decided," said Anastasia. Back in the evening, Matthew experienced déjà vu. Sitting again, crying again. "Okay, girls, I'm sick of you. Why are you crying so much? I told you, everything will be fine. Just because your half-baked tycoon showed up today, it doesn't mean anything. Don't look so surprised. I know he came. I even know what he came with, a subpoena. Give me 2 more days, then I can go to court. If anything else comes up, I'll let you know. He turned to Anastasia. Yeah, you get ready to get married just in case. Just like that. Clearly the marriage wouldn't be real. But Anastasia was worried, like she was actually getting married. She'd been watching Matthew, and she liked him more and more. Missing him when he was gone for long periods of time. Glad when he came. He wants to help. He's even willing to marry. But if he didn't have to save her, would he marry her, she pondered. Yes, very timely thoughts. There's a trial coming up. There's a good chance her son will be taken away, and she's dreaming. Sometimes Anastasia fell into despair. I can't win this trial no matter what Matthew says then. Seeing Matthew driving into town, bringing some papers, she began to believe that all was not lost. Matthew's a lawyer, knows what he's doing. A couple days later, Matthew brought some papers, spread them out on the table, sat Anastasia across from him, and began to explain. Now you're going to write an application for a residence permit. Tomorrow I'll go to the village, to the administration office, and register you with me. This is how I edited your text. In this way, we will solve the issue of housing. And what custody? You can't dig it up. The conditions for the child are in place, Matthew said. There are 2 problems: child support money and a single-parent family. The Wonsons will argue that there are grandparents in addition to the father. They're better able to provide childcare and decent support. You have a problem: either you take care of the child and then you have no income, or you go to work, but then you cannot provide care. Even if you work, your income does not compare to the Wonsons' income. That means you need a husband to provide an income so you can take care of the baby. Matthew smiled. By the way, I can apply for marriage registration tomorrow at the administration office. What, right tomorrow? Anastasia wondered. No, you think about it, but don't take too long. Time is running out. I don't understand you. You were going to ask Artem to marry you. I'm asking you to marry him. Especially since you say it's not a real marriage. Or is there something that makes you uncomfortable? Of course I'm confused. You're a lawyer. You know the risks. Signing a woman and child into a house you don't know, marrying her. Isn't that a risk? I'm a pretty good judge of character. It's a professional skill. And I'd also like to help a woman I like, Matthew answered, looking her in the eye. So you're about to sign a contract of service with me. You understand me as a lawyer. I will represent your interests in court. You just have to trust me. Well, that's all for now, he said. The anxious days of waiting for the trial dragged on. Matthew checked in on Anastasia and Sevelius. He brought in the guardianship officers from the city. 2 very serious ladies went around the house, looking in every corner, even the refrigerator and pots and pans. They looked at each other sternly, wrote something down, took pictures. Smiling strangely, they tried to play with Savli. For a long time they asked Anastasia what she played, what she ate, how much the child walked, what he was sick with. Then they signed a statement of living conditions. Matthew explained why it was necessary. Now the Wonsons will not be able to claim that the child has bad conditions and that you are not engaged in the development and upbringing of your son. Here is my edited version of the text. The trial was 3 days away. To keep her mind off her gloomy thoughts, Anastasia started cleaning. As she scrubbed the floors, dusted and hung out the rugs, she seemed to calm down a little. Rosalie, worried that she couldn't do anything to help, decided to at least indulge. She put the dough for the pies. After dressing Sevelius, she went out on the porch with him. The weather was fabulous. The frost was not strong, the sun was shining, everything around was so bright and festive. Nothing terrible would ever happen again. Anastasia had had her share of misfortune. She hadn't done anything wrong. Why should she be endlessly punished? Anastasia walked with Sevelius, played snowballs with him, went sledding. It had been a long time since she'd been in such a cloudless mood. Suddenly it was as if something prickled. It became cold and anxious. Something must happen, something very unpleasant. I didn't feel like going out. I wanted to go home and close myself in the fortress. The house was clean, bright, and smelled of cakes. No, nothing will happen. It was just a dream, Anastasia reassured herself. Rose, someone's coming, Rosalie said excitedly. It was as if Anastasia's anxiety had gotten to her. Who the hell is coming? Didn't Matthew say someone was coming? Anastasia went to the window. A large black car was turning down the driveway toward the house. So much for trouble. Her intuition didn't fail. There was a knock at the door. Anastasia took Sevelius in her arms. Rosalie went to open it. Two men stood on the doorstep. "Hello, I'm looking for Anastasia," one of them said. "Anastasia Smith?" "Come in," Rosalie replied. One of the men went inside, the other stayed on the porch. "You must be Anastasia." "And this is Sevelius. I'm Dan Vonson, Andrew's father. I'm here to get you to sign the relinquishment papers. The trial's in 3 days, and I don't want our family to be bombarded with reporters accusing us of all sins. It's all going to come down to the same thing. Let's save time and nerves. If you need money, give me a sum. You shouldn't have come. I won't sign anything. There'll be a trial." "So it'll be a trial. Are you going to give me conditions? What are you hoping for? And in your position, refusing to settle things amicably. You have no job and no money at home. Do you think you'll get to keep the baby? What I have and what I don't have, my lawyer can explain to you. I'm not talking to you." "Lawyer? Where'd you get a lawyer?" "Well, no lawyer's going to help you anyway. You're grasping at straws, girl." "Give them his info. My lawyer will contact him. If you're going to sue, they have something to talk about." "Matthew Anderson, please." "Service agreement? Who's Matthew Anderson? The one from LA? Don't bullshit me. You don't have the money for an average lawyer. And Anderson doesn't do charity work. And paternity cases are out of his league." Dan Wonson scrutinized the contract details. "This can't be right. What kind of tricks are these? Are you trying to trick me? Contact Matthew Anderson and ask him all your questions yourself. You'd better get going. It's a long drive back to town." "Oh, I found out what you're up to." "Then you're in trouble. You're not going to win a trial by smashing me up against the wall." Vonson irritably tossed the contract and walked out. Anastasia was shaking. Apparently the Wonsons really don't want a scandal, since Wonson SR had shown up to talk her into it. It's a scandal, and Andrew's back at the center. Journalists love Andrew. They'll tell you how the son of a steel magnate is stealing his ex-wife's baby. It's not the Wonsons who are afraid of a trial. They are sure that no court will go against their money and connections. They're afraid of being on the front page of the tabloids again. They're afraid for their reputations. Respectable and seemingly prosperous family Wonson, most of all afraid to fall in the mud, to lose the image of infallibility, hence the threats. How afraid Anastasia was. It seemed to her that everything was for nothing, that even Matthew could do nothing. She cradled her son in her arms, like it was the last time. "Should we leave?" Rose asked. "What do you think? Do you think they'll find us again?" "No, we have to go all the way now. Otherwise it'll never end." "What are you talking about? What do you mean you're leaving and leaving us behind?" Matthew asked. "My girl, we're together now, and I won't let you hurt Sevelius. You'll see." Matthew, when he heard what had happened, said, "Don't panic. I've got everything ready for trial. I don't care what Vonson said. We're going to win the trial, I promise you." "You believe me?" "I do." Anastasia nodded. "We'll go tomorrow and sign the papers. It'll be our last argument. Vonson won't have any reason to take the baby away from you." Anastasia calmed down, wiped her tears, and they went to drink tea and cakes. "And give Sevelius here. We'll go to bed with him," Anastasia called out. Rosalie hid her tears of joy. How good it was. Matthew was finally getting married. She was so attached to Sevelius that she could not imagine a better family for her beloved Matthew. She couldn't believe it wasn't a real marriage. Not until they admitted it to themselves. She had realized long ago that it was true love. Tomorrow they'd get married, and then we'd see how much strength they had to hide their feelings from each other. "Come on, brides, let's have tea and then go to bed. Put everything out of your minds. Don't get discouraged before your time. You need to rest so you look good tomorrow. You're getting married, after all." Rosalie came over and hugged Anastasia. I'm so happy for you." The next day, Anastasia and Matthew got married without guests, witnesses, or rings. Only Rosalie and Sevelius were waiting for them at home. Anastasia's mind was in turmoil, uncertain, unspoken. Had she really gotten married? What to do about it now? Here sits next to her husband, or still not a husband. And if he said after the trial, "That's it, wife, divorce," Anastasia realized that she does not want to divorce him and wants a real marriage, only with him alone. But you can't say that. Yeah, the situation. There's no telling what Matthew's thinking. He's sitting there with a completely unperturbed face. No emotion, just a smile or a sneer in his eyes. Married and married, it's no big deal. We're used to it. Only Aunt Rose sputtered with emotion, happy, hugging, kissing. Of the three of them, she was the most like a happy newlywed. Here it was, court day had arrived. Anastasia was so nervous that she gave the impression of being insane. Hands shaking, eyes huge with terror. She didn't even seem to blink. She didn't say a word all the way to town. Matthew looked at her with a wary eye to see if she'd fainted. He himself was professionally calm and collected. He couldn't calm Anastasia. But he tried to explain how to behave in court. But he didn't know if he got it. So he decided to use shock therapy. "All right, my little star. Are you reacting in any way? You married a normal woman, and now you're either dumb or crazy. Family life has brought you down quickly. Are you going to go to court with your divorcee right now?" Anastasia smiled, so she could hear well. "Now seriously, don't be stupid. Here's an express option, just what you need. When asked by the judge, say your first and last name. If the judge addresses you, say, 'Yes, Your Honor, I'll do the talking for you.' Daddy's girl, calm down. You need to look confident. Remember, your ex-husband and his father are in the audience. It's a sacred thing to mess with them, and we're going to do it tonight. Okay, here we go. Look at me. I swear to you, we're going to win. All right, one last shot." He leaned over to Anastasia and kissed her. "Okay, I think I'm back to normal now, but it's over. I'm all you're going to think about now." Outside the courthouse, Nelly was praying. When she saw her friend, she threw her arms around her and kissed her. Nelly's presence finally brought Anastasia to her senses. Not to say she'd calmed down, but when someone was supportive, confidence was added. Matthew turned on, stopped joking. His gaze became hard. He took Anastasia's hand and led her into the hall. Vonson's lawyer deflated when Bilton entered the room. Apparently, Vonson didn't even fully believe it was true. Who would have believed it? They were hoping for a quick victory over a homeless, uninterested nurse. This Bilton guy. During the hearing, it was revealed that the defendant has a job, a house and child support money from her husband. And the husband is none other than Mr. Bilton himself. It was a low blow. Vonson's attorney still tried to turn the situation around, but it was all in vain. There was no reason to take the child away from the mother. That's what the court ruled. On her way out of the courtroom, Anastasia was intercepted by Andrew. "You bitch. Bilton, is this some kind of lawyer thing to win a case? That's a little petty for a lawyer of his caliber. Or is it his thing, declaring every defendant his wife? The truth will come out. He'll lose his name, and you'll lose the baby, you and Bilton. This is ridiculous." "Young man, I'm sorry, but I really need my wife." Matthew came over and hugged and kissed Anastasia. "Anastasia, if you have any questions for my wife, feel free to contact me. I'm not only a husband. I'm also a lawyer. I advised her not to communicate with you. If you have an irresistible urge to socialize, there are reporters outside. They have a lot of questions for you. Good day to you." Matthew led his ex-wife Anastasia through the crowd of reporters, tossing no comment, and handed her to Nelly, and handed her into Nelly's arms. "Girls, I've got some more business to take care of here. I've got paperwork to do. And you have nothing else to do here. I think you have a lot to talk about. Anastasia, take a cab and go to Nelly's. I'll pick you up there later." As she got into the cab, Anastasia saw the crowd of journalists rushing to the courthouse doors. They surrounded the Wonsons who had come out. They couldn't get through. "If you please, gentlemen, did you order a scandal?" It's déjà vu all over again, same apartment, same kitchen, same two girlfriends. Only now there was no consolation but no news to tell. Nayli was curious, what was it? Where did Bilton come from? And most interesting of all, was he really a husband? Anastasia told everything that had happened to her in the meantime. Nayli was surprised, about to cry a couple of times, but asked the question head on. So is he your husband? Oh, Nayli, I don't know. I think we married to win a case. But I love him so much I don't know how I can let him go. And he wants to let go. Who knows? He kissed me so hard today, I believed he didn't. Or maybe he was just reassuring me. He could see I was worried. I think I'm in love again. One love wasn't enough. No, Anastasia, don't compare. I told you about your boy Major right off the bat. But you didn't listen. This one's different. Remember when you sent him to me? I was tense at first, and then I looked, and he was all over the place. He got everyone he could to help you. I didn't know he was a big-time lawyer. I was just glad you had a real man by your side. But he complimented you a lot too. I was jealous of him. Oh, come on. I'm not an oligarch or an expensive lawyer. But I think I found the right guy. And you're not talking. So tell me, local. No, I've got a reputation here, you get a lot of assholes hitting on me. When Anastasia left, Nayli was sad. They asked her to work at the restaurant again. She took it. She had to make a living. More gangster faces, obscene offers. All in a circle, no way out. One morning when she was leaving the restaurant, a young man came up, said that he was on a business trip, he had nowhere to go, and spent every evening in the restaurant. Strangely, Nayli didn't remember him. He walked her home, and then again. And then again a week later he was going home and suddenly called Nayli with him. Let's go and see where I live and meet my mom. Just for a couple days. What have we beautiful people got to lose? So Nayli went. She stayed there only 2 days, but the trip back and forth took a week. Alex lived in a small town in Houston, in the Appalachian foothills. It was an amazing town. Everywhere you went, there were mountains ahead. The town stood in a valley, but there were mountains on all sides, southern-style bright, blooming, even in winter. For a native Houstonian, it was a fabulous little house in a thicket of unseen bushes. Alex's sweet, friendly mom Nayli fell in love with the city, the house, and a little bit of Alex. Back to gray, unfriendly Houston. More restaurants, drunken suitors. Alex wrote called, but she didn't dare change her fate so abruptly. 2 days ago, his mom wrote, Nayli, my daughter, would you come back? Alex is waiting for you. You liked it here. So come. Of course, we don't know each other much, but if you like Alex, don't waste time. We're waiting for you. Anastasia, I think I might go. What if this is my chance? I'm not going to have a life here. Either I drink, or I'm going to get my ass handed to me by gangsters. And then I'll be lost for sure. Do you love Alex? I'm not sure yet, but I think I could love him. He's a good guy, and his mom is amazing. Nayli, I'm not much of a counselor. I can't figure out my own life. But if you like Alex, you should go. If you don't go now, you'll spend the rest of your life thinking, if I'd gone then, I'd have been happy. But it's better to do it and regret it. Matthew arrived, covered the girls' party. As Nayli and Anastasia were saying goodbye, Matthew suddenly said, Girls, don't you want to go to your homeland? Seeing the perplexed looks, he continued. Why are you surprised? Nayli, when did you visit your mom? Anastasia, your mother, I think, has never seen her grandson. And we have a new son-in-law to get to know. Let's take Rosalie and go. Do you have a place to put a big group like that? We drove home. Anastasia was silent again. She just didn't know what to say. How extraordinary he was. The best. At home, cozy, warm, Rosalie in denial, whom no one would ever take away. Happiness is so simple. A week later, they were going to go to the village. Matthew went into town to pick up Nayli. Rosalie and Anastasia were packing. There wasn't much to pack, just a couple of sweaters and some pants for Tyler. But Rosalie couldn't go empty-handed, and Anastasia was baking pies. Rosalie was carrying jars of salads and pickles. She wanted to bring some mushrooms and cabbage, but Anastasia stood up for her. Rosalie, we're not going to starve. We'll take the pies. But if we bring pickles and tomatoes, Mom will be offended. She's got plenty of that stuff. Or do you think yours is better? That's what she'll think. She'll be offended. Why don't we buy her some marshmallows? She loves marshmallows, and they rarely bring them to the village. The daughter's return stirred up the whole village. Neighbors ran to the house of Jennifer, Anastasia's mother, all day long, some for salt, some for flour, some for potatoes. Suddenly everyone had run out of everything, and there was nowhere to get it but Jennifer's. And the wailing began. "Oh, Anastasia, how beautiful you've become. Like you used to be ugly. Is that your little boy? You didn't come with a stranger, did you?" Anastasia Vonson is interesting. But that's not why we're here. Anastasia brought her new husband. That's who I'm curious to see. Oh, what a guy. Only in the city. Here, girls, you're sitting here, you can't get married. And Anastasia Duck has a second husband, and he's rich again. And with a child. Did you hear Nayli's getting married, going south? Not to Dan, is she? I don't think so. Come on, it's all Latinos in the south. Anyway, the village was filled with gossip for a week. Matthew put up with the sightings. He knew it was the village's main entertainment. Jennifer felt bad for the villagers, but she couldn't help it. She couldn't chase the neighbors out of the yard. In the evening, they were finally alone. We sat at the table and talked. Jennifer really liked her daughter's husband. It wasn't that he was an established, serious, famous lawyer. Her first husband was not bad either, a tractor driver. Jennifer saw the way Matthew looked at her daughter. If they said now that the marriage wasn't real, that there was no relationship between them, Jennifer wouldn't believe it. But no one had told her that. And no one had told Jennifer that Rosalie was not related to Matthew in any way. She wondered who she was to Matthew. If she calls him by his first name and middle name, she's not his mother. Though it could happen. But she didn't feel comfortable asking. And why should she? What difference does it make? The main thing is that her daughter is loved in this family. She could feel it. And her grandson is a delight. She lived, she waited. What more could she ask for? Jennifer couldn't sleep at night. She went into the kitchen and poured tea. Something was troubling her. It seemed to her that Anastasia was keeping her safe and not telling her the whole truth. Rosalie heard that Jennifer was awake. She lay there thinking and finally decided that a mother had a right to know how much trouble her daughter had been through. You can't sleep? Yeah, it's a little unsettling. You tell me, is Anastasia okay? She is now. Actually, of course she is. Andrew tried to take the baby away from her. Matthew saved her. Your girl is a tough cookie, a tough nut to crack. She fought so hard, and Matthew just fell in love. But if he hadn't, he would have helped her anyway. So Rosalie told Jennifer everything, or almost everything. She didn't mention the fake marriage. Why would she if it wasn't relevant? What did she say? No, she didn't say anything. Wouldn't I have helped? No, Jennifer. She couldn't have come to you, they would have found her immediately. It's fate, really. If she hadn't gotten lost and come to us, you'd never have seen your grandson. Early in the morning, Anastasia got up and went to the kitchen. She wanted to make her own breakfast. Rosalie's cooking. She's so lazy. But again, it didn't work. Rosalie and her mother were already in the kitchen. There was a pile of pancakes on the table. Mommy, did you guys bake pancakes all night? Her mom came over to Anastasia, kissed her, hugged her, held her tight. Mom, what are you doing? Anastasia looked into her mom's eyes, tears welling up. Did something happen to you? No, sweetie. It's okay now, we're cooking. Go on. Anastasia pulled the blanket off the bed, wrapped herself up tightly, and went out onto the porch. It was a frosty, fresh morning. And there was also a huge, indestructible feeling of happiness. That was it. No more troubles and misery. Home, Jennifer's mom, Rosalie, Matthew. That was all there was to happiness. The door opened. Another cocoon, Matthew, fell out onto the porch. You know, it turns out I miss practicing law. Your case, I'm sorry, it's not my level. I think it's time to call it a night and get back to work. If you ever think about it, will you come with me? That's not how I'm asking you. First it was, Anastasia, will you marry me? I've already. No, that doesn't count. The first one, a real wife, someone I love. I want a wedding. Although I think you're the one who should be talking. You and I haven't even exchanged rings. You can't do that. I don't get it. Are you in? Or are we getting divorced? No, we're not. I'm in. Emma was rushing home when suddenly she heard a. Emma turned off the bedroom light. Time to go to bed. Tomorrow's a day off, of course. She could stay in bed longer, but it was almost 1 o'clock in the morning and her eyes were getting sleepy. Hurry up and get under the covers. The woman watched her favorite TV series and could not tear herself away. So their everything was vital love, betrayal, and a difficult period of the main character. Just like in her, Emma's fate. The series also ended with a happy ending. It was clear from the very beginning. There's no such thing as a happy ending in a movie like this. Anything could have happened to Emma. But the circumstances are such that she's doing well now. I can't believe it sometimes. How great everything turned out in the end, as if Emma's life was prescribed by the director who creates all these series. It all started many years ago, and at the start little Emma had a lot of hardships and losses waiting for her. Her early childhood she remembered vaguely. In the memory remained only sensations and images. Father strong, reliable, big. He often carried his daughter on his strong shoulders. The girl adored these moments. It was both fun and a little scary to look at the world from such a height. Her father's strong arms supported her back and legs. Emma knew she was safe. Mom. Warm hugs, kisses, a gentle voice, her face always somewhere high and lost in a haze. Emma can't remember Mom's features. They blur, slip away. But for some reason she can still clearly see her mother's dress in front of her turquoise with small black polka dots. And then her parents were gone. Suddenly, overnight, the lives of the young couple were taken away by a fire in the dormitory. Someone left an unlit cigarette butt on the sofa. But fortunately, Emma was then in a round-the-clock kindergarten, and therefore did not suffer. She remembers how much she longed for her family. First she cried, then she was angry at her mom and dad. Why don't they come? Why don't they pick her up like they used to? The nanny explained as best she could to the 3-year-old. Emma was very tiny then, but she still remembered her feelings: fear, despair, for some reason rage. The girl was to be sent to an orphanage. The appropriate papers were already being drawn up for her. But then Aunt Chris, her father's sister, showed up. She lived alone in the village, pulling 2 daughters and Emma. In general, she was not particularly needed, especially since brother and sister hardly ever spoke to each other. But relatives of Emma's father pressed on Chris, say, cannot be allowed to have a living aunt girl in the orphanage grew up. So she had to take her niece in. Chris was the kind of woman for whom it is very important what people say. Emma's childhood was not a happy one. Aunt Chris wasn't exactly happy about the extra mouth. No, she fulfilled her duty to the child, correctly dressed, fed, educated. She sent her child to school on time, made sure Emma didn't hang around, and taught her niece the ins and outs of everyday life. But Emma saw how her aunt treated her daughters, with what love and tenderness she looked at them, how she smiled at them. Aunt Chris always tried to please her girls, bought them on the last money sweets, which they loved, dressed them in clean dressy dresses. Emma, like the youngest, had inherited clothes, and her wishes were never taken into account. Aunt Chris was delighted when her girls fidgeted in front of the mirror. What beauties are growing up. They're just photo models and can pose. Emma did the same, trying to win her aunt's praise. But the words were quite different to her, that monkey is wriggling all like her mother. You should do something else, and so it was with everything. No wonder that Emma grew up a quiet and even perhaps hindered girl. She tried to be as inconspicuous as possible, so as not to irritate her aunt and cousins. Emma cleaned the house constantly and often cooked dinner. She wanted to justify her life in this house in some way. Emma wanted to prove to Chris that she hadn't taken her niece in for nothing. She was useful too. Emma had realized from an early age that no one would love her just for her pretty eyes. Recognition and respect must be earned. The girl dreamed of growing up soon and becoming independent. Therefore, having finished 9 grades of the village school, she applied to the college. That 2 more years of school was out of the question. Emma needed to quickly get a profession and separate from the family of Aunt Chris. She had been told this more than once. And the older Emma got, the more often such conversations took place. "You're not smart enough to finish the 11th grade and go to college," her aunt said about her niece's future. "That's why you should go straight to college. You'll get a profession. In 3 years you will become independent, you will start earning money. Who knows? Maybe you'll settle down in town or get married. You're not so bad looking." Yeah, Emma grew up to be a very pretty girl. She knew that. She had eyes. And she looked in the mirror, sometimes big hazel eyes framed by thick black lashes, plump, well-defined lips, chiseled cheekbones. The figure was a success, too. Emma was tall, slender, long-legged. Aunt Chris often said that Emma was not their breed. Her own daughters had stronger bones, rounder cheeks, lighter hair. Maybe it was because of this different breed that her aunt didn't fully accept her niece. Emma didn't know for sure. She only realized that she looked very much like her mother, and that she grew up in an orphanage. So Emma didn't know her relatives. Maybe they'd be a lot nicer to a girl of their breed than Aunt Chris. Oh well. Emma was a very modest, quiet girl, did not go to dances, did not go out with boys in the evenings. Still, she had her admirers in the village. When Emma was about 16 years old, she began to be courted by local boys. But Emma was not ready for such relationships, and the girl did not plan to marry early. First, she wanted to get a profession, get on her feet, feel confident, and then she could think about her personal life. Emma dreamed of a big, strong family, a loving, caring husband, at least 3 children, a spacious, cozy house. She wanted love, understanding of people close to her. But the girl knew first she had to study to prepare the ground. So after school, Emma went to the city. She, as a visitor, was provided with a hostel. The girl was only 16 years old when she found herself all alone in an unfamiliar place. The abundance of people and cars, the new way of life, all this was confusing at first. But then Emma even liked it. She became almost independent from her aunt in her 16 years. She lived on her own, received a scholarship and payment for the loss of the breadwinner. This money was enough for food, clothes, and transportation. The girl did not need more. At the age of 20, Emma received a diploma. Now she was a food technologist, which she was very proud of. The name of the specialty sounded solid and weighty. However, very soon the girl realized that it was impossible to get a job in the city without experience. The scholarship was no longer paid, as well as payment for the loss of parents. For the state, she is now an adult, a young specialist. Accordingly, she had to support herself. Emma got a job as a cleaner in the Housing and Utilities Department. She grabbed the first vacancy she could find. How can you make sense of it when hunger and the street loom in front of you? The work was hard, physically exhausting. The pay was minimal, but at least she was given a room under the stairs as a Housing and Utilities employee. At least she had a roof over her head and some money for bread and milk. Thank them for that. Emma did not give up her attempts to find a more qualified and better paid job. In her free time, the girl went on interviews, proudly showing potential employers her red diploma. But no one needed a young lady with no experience. One day she was lucky after all. She came for an interview at a beverage company. Having seen the vacancy in the newspaper, Emma decided to try her luck. Already in the first minutes of the interview, the girl realized that she would not be hired. The HR employee seemed to communicate with Emma for the sake of a checkmark. Maybe she was fulfilling some recruitment plan or creating a semblance of work. Emma immediately guessed that she would not be hired here as a technologist. And then he walked into the office, Aiden, a tall man in jeans and a plain black t-shirt under which she could see strong muscles. You could tell he played some kind of sport or went to the gym. He had a feeling of strength and self-confidence. He looked like a Hollywood actor, a slightly mocking look, white teeth, a charming smile, charming dimples on his cheeks. The man was about 15 years older than Emma. The girl, without wanting to, looked at him. Then she realized, looked away. She didn't want him to notice her involuntary admiration. He'd think she was a fool. But Aiden had noticed. He winked cheerfully at Emma and turned to the human resources lady who was conducting the interview. And who is this young, lovely creature, an applicant for the position of technologist? But she's not a good fit. She has no experience at all, and her specialization is not the right one. Yes, it's hard to find a job for young people without experience. The man shook his head, looking at Emma with interest. It's hard on them. What about the secretary position? I'm in need of a new assistant right now. She's young, quick, energetic, and she's got the right looks, which is important for our image. We were going to transfer Smith from the energy department, the personnel officer reminded me. Smith looks good in her position. Let's put the girl on probation. Something tells me she'll do a good job. Aiden winked at Emma and left the office, grabbing a file from the desk. Without expecting it, Emma became a secretary. The job was not difficult. The girl was quickly brought up to speed. I'm sorry you're in such a difficult emotional situation, Emma. Falling in love with a married boss is a very delicate and painful situation. I want to support you and remind you that your feelings are natural and beyond reason. It's not your fault that you fell in love, but you correctly realize that a relationship with a married man is a path to a dead end that will only bring pain to all involved. You're thinking that Aiden is not for you. A family man has a rational grain. It is better to accept this situation for what it is and try to deal with your feelings. They'll fade with time. Focus on work, personal goals and interests. Find new hobbies and meet up with friends. Perhaps you should consider a new romantic encounter. It will be easier to distract yourself that way. Hang in there, Emma. You are a strong girl and you will definitely cope with this difficult situation. I believe in you. If you want to talk, I'm always ready to listen. Over the weekend, Emma got used to the idea that she had nothing in common with her boss. But on Monday, when she saw his smile and his eyes with a sly squint, she could not control herself again. She was dreaming, daydreaming. She wanted Aiden to hold her in his arms, to kiss her, to hold her close. Emma would be the happiest person in the world. One evening, Aiden invited Emma into his office. It was late. The co-workers had dispersed. The boss was preparing for an upcoming audit and had stayed late to look over the reports. Emma was required by regulation to stay as long as the boss was at work. Aiden rarely stayed late. Once every couple or 3 months at most. That's when he did too. Emma, I need to talk to you straight. The man began as Emma sat down in the visitor's chair. The girl tensed. Maybe the chief had some complaints about her work. What if he offered her to write a letter of resignation? Where else would she find such a job? You've been with us for 6 months. You're a good girl, you're efficient. But I realized not so long ago that it's not just those qualities that attract me to you. Aiden looked Emma straight in the eye and spoke in a quiet, calm voice. All of this together made an incredible impression on her. You're very beautiful, the boss continued. But it's not even that, not only that. There is something about you that makes me think of you all the time. I don't know what it is. Emma was already a little dizzy from everything that was happening. Her heart was racing in her chest. There was a chill in her stomach, just like before exams. I think you have some feelings for me too. Am I right? Aiden stared at Emma, waiting for an answer. How could the girl deny the obvious? Yes, of course. She had been in love with the chief for a long time. She tried not to show her feelings. She thought she was succeeding well. But no, Aiden, it turns out, understood everything. Later, many years later, Emma looked at the situation with different eyes. Aiden had pressured her, made her feel like she had a choice, but in fact the outcome was a foregone conclusion. Aiden is rich, powerful, a handsome man, mature, established. And she is a young girl in a very dependent position on him. Aiden couldn't help but realize how important this job and this salary were to Emma. And he knew how to treat naive young women, well, how to behave in a way that would make them lose their heads to him. But the realization came much later. Then it seemed that fate had made her an incredible gift. The girl did not even believe that she was so lucky. A man like Aiden had caught her eye. She was in love with him and would do anything for him. Yes, you're right. I have feelings for you too. Emma confessed, blushing. She didn't know why she suddenly felt fragile and vulnerable. So you were not mistaken, the man smiled. Let's make a deal first. Let's stop yelling at each other. Secondly, I really want to spend more time with you. So I suggest that we have dinner at a restaurant right now. How about it? Emma shrugged. She hadn't yet gotten used to the idea that Aiden himself was proposing a relationship to her. It was unbelievable. At that moment, she had somehow completely forgotten about the chief's wife and his 3 sons. It didn't matter. The main thing was Aiden. He's there. He looks at her with eyes full of tenderness and admiration, smiles at her, and invites her to dinner. "I'm probably not dressed for a restaurant," Emma said finally. There was no dress code in the company. Everyone wore what they wanted to wear. Emma came to work that day in jeans and a t-shirt. If she had known, she would have worn one of her favorite dresses, which now, thanks to her good salary, she had plenty of. Emma. Aiden smiled. "You don't understand anything, and you don't even realize how gorgeous you look in those jeans of yours. It's just adorable." That evening they went to a restaurant. It was the first time Emma was in the cabin of the chief's expensive foreign car. It was also, by the way, her first time in a restaurant. The girl felt a little confused. At first she did not know how to behave, what to say. She was afraid of looking like a village idiot in front of Aiden. But gradually the man managed to do the seemingly impossible. With his jokes, mixed with compliments, he relieved the young companion of her stiffness. She didn't even notice how she began to communicate with him simply and sincerely. Aiden wanted to know everything about Emma, and she told him about her cold childhood, her difficult years of school, and her work as a janitor. Aiden looked at her earnestly and remained silent, not interrupting her, eagerly catching every word. "You've had a hard life," he said when Emma had finished. "Life has not been very good to you, but you're with me now, and things will be different." Emma smiled. She immediately and unconditionally trusted this powerful and influential man. At last the girl felt secure, an unfamiliar sensation but very pleasant. Then they kissed for a long time in Aiden's car. Emma felt dizzy from his embrace and kisses. His touch felt good to her. She liked to feel the warmth of his body. She greedily inhaled his scent and was truly disappointed when Aiden, pulling away, suddenly said he had to go. He drove her home, kissed her softly on the cheek. "I can't leave you here alone," he said, glancing around the neighborhood. "We'll figure something out." Emma and Aiden's story had been going on ever since. They didn't hide their relationship at work, but they didn't advertise it. Although Aiden could smile at Emma in a special way in the presence of colleagues, and even complimented her in front of them. That is, not too flamboyant. Of course, it wasn't long before everyone knew everything. It made Emma a little uneasy, but no one said anything to her face. People valued their jobs and held on to them. That was probably why no one wanted to ruin their relationship with the chief. Before Emma knew it, Aiden had become everything to her. She didn't need anyone else, as long as he was near. To hear his voice, to inhale his scent, to feel his heartbeat. Emma was ready to dissolve in him, to do for him everything he wanted. When they did not see each other for a long time, which did not happen often, the girl was very longing. She could not eat anything. She melted before her eyes, and she ceased to be interested in anything. Books were not read, TV series were not watched. Emma counted the days and even hours until she met her lover. It was like an addiction. Aiden patronized Emma. He liked to surprise and delight her. The man was not stingy with gifts, expensive jewelry, brand-name clothes, shoes, certificates to spas. He thought of something new every time. Aiden rented a luxurious apartment for Emma in the city center, spacious, bright, stylishly furnished. Sometimes he stayed here overnight. And in those moments, Emma felt especially happy. She imagined they were husband and wife. She didn't have to share him with anyone or hide. The only thing that clouded her happiness was that Aiden had a family, a fact that couldn't be ignored. The man, without noticing it himself, often told Emma something about his children or his spouse. They were mostly funny and sweet stories. The man loved his boys and had great respect for his wife. Did he love her? Emma couldn't answer that question for herself, and Aiden didn't dare ask. No, they often talked about frank topics, but here Emma was afraid to hear a positive answer. What if Aiden really loved his wife? And she, Emma, just a passing fancy. And yet Emma felt that Aiden took her very seriously. He may have planned a brief affair with the young secretary at the beginning of their relationship, but then it turned out that they were very good together. "You understand me like no one else," Aiden confessed more than once, looking at Emma. "I feel so good with you and so calm, my soul rests." It's such an amazing feeling to realize that there is someone who accepts you with all your strengths and weaknesses. Aiden was right. Emma did love him with some kind of unconditional love. Even if he had committed some horrible act or crime, it wouldn't have changed Emma's attitude towards him. 10 years flew by unnoticed. Emma and Aiden grew closer during that time. They occasionally flew together on vacations. Aiden would book a business trip at work and take Emma with him. Those were wonderful days: the sea, the beaches, the incredible beauty of nature. And it was just the two of them, with no other eyes or ears. Emma wondered more than once if Aiden's wife knew that her husband had had a mistress for a long time. It was unlikely that she was still in the dark. The woman was not a naive fool. One day, Emma dared to ask Aiden about it. "Don't worry," he smiled, stroking Emma's hair. "She and I have a loose relationship. Without straining each other with jealousy and control. Mealy is free to do whatever she wants, just like me." Emma couldn't understand that. She explained to herself that this relationship between the couple was a marriage of convenience, not love. Aiden and Mealy's parents were big businessmen who had decided to pool their capital and invested in their children. There wasn't much love between the couple. Emma didn't want to think so. It was somehow comforting and gave hope that when Aiden's children grew up and became independent, he could finally divorce his wife to make her Emma his lawfully wedded wife. Yes, Emma was no longer the young, inexperienced 20-year-old secretary who had agreed to have an affair with the chief. She was in her 30s by then. Well, I guess that's just her nature. Emma remained naive, maybe even worldly stupid. It seemed to her that sooner or later Aiden would marry her. 2 more years passed, and then one morning Emma realized she couldn't get out of bed. She felt sick, nausea rising to her throat at the slightest movement. At that moment, the woman realized that a miracle had happened. It looked like she was expecting a baby. She and Aiden had been very careful. The man didn't want children outside of marriage, but no method of contraception gives a 100% guarantee. Despite not feeling well, Emma suddenly felt happy. She felt warm and clear at heart, and she got out of bed and made her way to the pharmacy where she bought a test. Emma was very afraid that she was wrong. But the test did not disappoint and almost immediately showed 2 bright stripes, indicating that she had a baby under her heart. Emma hadn't worried much before her conversation with Aiden. Yes, he'd said more than once that he didn't want any more children. But she didn't think that Aiden would reject her when he found out about the baby. He loved her so much, cared for her so tenderly, showered her with compliments and gifts. So wouldn't he be happy to hear that they were going to have a baby soon? Emma has been dreaming of a baby for so long. When she met moms walking with their babies, she looked at them and envied them, desperately envious of those women with strollers. And now she's going to have a baby too. Finally, a son or a daughter, it didn't matter. The important thing was that Emma would love him, and he'll love her too. Emma has a man she loves, and now she's going to have a baby. The dreams of her childhood and youth are coming true. It's such a blessing. Aiden, hearing the news, frowned. "Emma, but we had a deal." There was a distinctly accusatory note in his voice. Emma started to justify herself, surprising herself. She had already realized that Aiden wasn't happy about the baby, but she still hadn't given up hope of changing her lover's mind. She wanted him to share her joy and excitement, to tell her that everything would be all right. It didn't work. The man stood his ground. He didn't want the baby. The only way out was to terminate the pregnancy. Children out of wedlock were out of the question. Emma cried, begged Aiden to come to his senses, and for the first time in their 12-year relationship, she was angry at the man she loved. How dare he suggest such a thing to her? To get rid of her long-awaited, wanted child. "I love you. I like the way things are between us. But the baby doesn't. I have the right to decide," Aiden said. No, you don't." Emma slammed the door and jumped out of the apartment Aiden had rented for her. She ran off into the night wherever she could see. The woman wasn't afraid to stay on the street. She had her cell phone on her. Plus, she'd accumulated a small fortune over the years. She'd have enough money. Enough for her and her baby for a while. And then Emma would get a job and everything would be fine. "I won't betray you, my little one," Emma said to her daughter. Yes, to her daughter. Emma realized what was waiting for the girl the very moment she ran away from home. Her intuition had worked, and the woman trusted her completely. Emma quit her job at Aiden's company and rented a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Rent was cheaper there, and she didn't have to save money now. Aiden called often. Emma answered right away. Each time she thought her lover had come to his senses. But no, he still stood his ground, wanting Emma back, but urging her to get rid of the baby. Emma was nervous. She was under tremendous stress every day. She was terrified of the future. The woman could not find a job. Most importantly, she had no one to lean on. Emma had grown accustomed to Aiden, to his sensitivity, attention, tenderness, and support. He could playfully solve all her problems and lift Emma's spirits with a few words. And now Aiden had become alien and inaccessible. Emma could feel their bond breaking, and it was almost physically painful. Sometimes she even thought about doing what he wanted, getting rid of the baby, and then everything would be as it had been. But those thoughts quickly faded away. No, Emma would have this baby, have it and raise it. She'd be fine. She'd wanted to be a mother for so long. She hadn't realized how strong that desire was until she had a baby in her heart. And yet Emma couldn't keep the pregnancy going. Worries, constant stress, nerves, all this together gave such an unfortunate result. Emma collapsed on the street. The pain was such that her eyes went black. Emma thought she was going to pass out. But no, she saw, realized, and felt everything. Someone called an ambulance. Emma was taken away from the store, on the porch of which she was writhing in pain. The woman was ready to endure any agony to save her baby. But something told her that nothing would work. Hope, of course, remained, but it was very weak and ghostly. In the hospital, on a cold couch, under the indifferent looks of doctors, strictly looking from under white masks, sounded terrible for Emma words clean. There's nothing left to save. Then Emma lay in the ward. There were several other women here. They were still pregnant. The doctors had saved their babies. The expectant mothers were talking in hushed tones so as not to alarm Emma, discussing their babies. Each of them was sure that now all the threats were over and their babies would be born. But Emma had nothing to hope for. At the first visit, the doctor shocked Emma with the news: most likely, you will not be able to become a mother. It's a complicated case. It was about saving your life. You should know that it is unlikely that you will be able to give birth naturally. But there are options. Medicine doesn't stand still. Emma wasn't listening. Next thing she knew, she was falling into an abyss of despair and fear. Would her biggest dream never come true? Would no one ever call her mom? What was there to live for? Aiden met Emma at the hospital. How did he know what had happened? The woman was surprised, of course, but not particularly surprised. She didn't care much about anything at that moment. Emma wanted to go to the apartment she'd rented for herself, but Aiden had taken her home, the place where she'd lived for years and where she'd been happy. "Stop fooling around," Aiden said. "Get back here." Well, that was a mess. Home was home. And Emma didn't care. It took a long time for the woman to come back to life. At first, she couldn't even eat, and that was only because Aiden made her. She didn't need anything but a couch and a pillow, and no one to touch her. Emma blamed herself for not keeping the baby safe, thinking too much about stupid things, worrying about nothing. That's the result. She'd thought it was Aiden's fault too at first, but he'd tried so hard. The man had turned back into the same sensitive and attentive man he had been at the beginning of the relationship. Cooked for Emma her favorite dishes, watched TV shows with her, cared as much as he could. It seemed very touching. "I think I genuinely regret what happened," Aiden said. "I reassessed the situation and realized that I had been selfish. I'm sorry. Let's start over. This time I'll be more attentive to your wants and needs. The doctors said you were between life and death. It's scary to think that I might have lost you." Gradually, Emma melted away. She accepted the current state of affairs. After all, children weren't the end of the world. Many people now consciously choose childlessness, and there are many interesting things besides heirs. In addition, next to her was such a person loving, sensitive. Not everyone is so lucky. And Emma decided to stay happy, no matter what. And it worked. Aiden and Emma began to travel more. Over the next 2 years, they traveled almost the whole world up mountains, on ocean waves, and even across the desert in jeeps. It was so exciting, thrilling, and wonderful. The main thing is that Aiden was always there, protecting, supporting, hugging. His children were grown now. They didn't need their father every day. And Mealy never needed one at all, especially in her husband's presence. So now Aiden could spend more time with Emma, which of course she was delighted about. But as time went on, things began to change. At first subtly, and then more and more clearly. Aiden was suddenly incredibly busy, staying late at work, going on business trips, and when he was with Emma, he was still in his own thoughts. Aiden didn't compliment Emma anymore, didn't ask her how her day was going, and he didn't talk about himself much either. Emma panicked. She was suddenly afraid. She'd gotten used to having Aiden around all the time. It seemed to her that it would always be that way. They had been through so much together. But now, something strange and frightening was happening. The man was clearly distant, and the process was gaining momentum and speed. Emma didn't even dare talk to Aiden about it. She was no longer the naive, inexperienced girl she'd been at the beginning of her relationship with him. But her insecurities hadn't gone away either. Outwardly, this Emma looked like a successful and satisfied woman. But that was only on the outside. Emma was afraid to hear direct, honest answers to her questions that would undo everything in her life. So she kept quiet. But Aiden himself once decided to have a serious conversation. That day, or rather evening, was forever etched in the woman's memory. Aiden arrived late at Emma's house, when she was about to go to bed. The woman was glad. She missed him very much. Emma missed talking to him, his jokes, and even his funny jabs. Maybe things weren't so bad between them, since Aiden had decided to come to her at a time like this. Maybe Emma was just screwing herself up beyond belief. Emma, Aiden said, "It's hard to accept this right away, but we have to break up." Emma felt as if she'd been hit with a gush of cold water. She flapped her eyelashes confusedly and must have gone pale overnight, because Aiden hurriedly pulled up a chair for her. Apparently he was afraid Emma would faint or something. Then the man talked at length about how he'd been happy with Emma for almost a decade and a half, describing her virtues and assuring her that she had more to come. It happens all the time. Relationships are just exhausted. There's no more of that spark, that passion, emotion, vivid sensations. "The same thing is happening to you," he said. What does he see? What makes Aiden think that Emma's feelings for him have faded too? Emma thought. It's probably just easier for him to think that, since he's going to leave her. And of course he didn't want to feel wrong about it. It's much easier to believe that Emma, too, has grown cold to him. And as he said, the relationship is over. Aiden talked a lot, and as always, quite persuasively. The man knew how to do that. Emma listened, nodding somewhere, answering something somewhere. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't argue, because she realized it was useless. Aiden had already made up his mind for the two of them. You could see it in his eyes. It was in his voice and in every gesture. He was talking, and I was slowly dying, Emma thought. I realized that the old Emma was gone. Aiden, he was everything to me. Without him, I had no idea how I would exist. Aiden admitted with shocking sincerity, I met someone else, and I developed strong feelings for this other person. I myself did not expect that such a thing was possible in my old age. The man couldn't hold back a smile when talking about his new love. This is something incredible, Emma. You're going to have to quit my company. Quit. It's just that she'll be working there now. Well, you can't have you two dating all the time. It would be hard on both of you. But also for me, of course. I understand, Emma nodded, barely holding back tears. I feel so lousy about the whole thing, she said. I'm really sorry for you, Aiden grumbled. It'll be okay with me, Emma smiled. She didn't want Aiden to feel sorry for her. Not this. You're sorry about this, but I told you everything honestly. I didn't lie to you. It's hard, this whole thing. I'll help you find another job. And you can stay in the apartment as long as you want until you find a new one. Thanks, Emma nodded. That was it. Emma's old life was over. She wouldn't stay in the apartment that held so many happy memories. She'd moved to another city because it reminded her of Aiden. And it wasn't easy. Wow, so strange they had been together for a whole 15 years, but almost 15. Emma was used to Aiden, used to living with him, and thought it would always be that way. Everything turned upside down in the blink of an eye. Emma used her savings to rent an apartment in the new city and started looking for a job. And here she had to face the harsh truth: finding a suitable place was not easy. Getting a job in her specialty was out of the question. For almost 15 years, Emma had been working as a secretary, but there were no vacancies at all. And she couldn't do anything else. She had to look at unskilled positions. That's how Emma became a kitchen assistant at a local restaurant. Emma's job duties included a variety of functions. She cleaned the kitchen floors, washed dishes, and carried pots from table to table. Whatever was asked of her, she did. Emma worked hard. She was always on the job. It was hard work. At the end of the day, her back ached, her legs ached. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to rent a small apartment. But this job had a nice bonus. At the end of the day, she could take home leftovers. Not an unreasonable perk on a tight budget. Did Emma miss her old life? Did she long for a comfortable apartment, traveling, expensive boutiques? No, I don't think so. Emma was sad, of course, but not about the beautiful life that Aiden had once provided for her. She missed Aiden himself, despite what he'd done to her. Emma still loved him so much that she couldn't even look in the direction of other men, although familiar friends were constantly advising her to get on with her love life. Sometimes Emma imagined that something had happened after which Aiden had lost all his money, his company, his house, all his possessions. Naturally, his new young mistress would immediately turn her back on him. She's with him for the money. That much is clear. But Emma would forgive Aiden everything betrayal and dislike and would gladly accept him. But that's just fantasy. Emma was well aware that such a thing would never happen. As time passed, Emma's mental wounds slowly but surely healed. They were now healed scars. Emma lived alone. She was in her late 40s. No children, no husband, no profession, no proper job. Emma was often sad because of this unsettledness. She wanted so much to come home to someone, to take care of a dear, beloved person and accept their care. Loneliness is sad and even scary. Of course, the woman could have had an affair with someone, but in her surroundings there were no people suitable for the role of the other half. She didn't know what true love was, and she couldn't settle for anything less now. Emma couldn't get over herself. There were bookish joys in her life. She loved to read and became a regular visitor to the local library. Dostoevsky, Bulgakov, Tolstoy. Emma devoured the works, familiarized herself with the inner world of the classics, and rethought her own fate through the prism of the events in the novels and stories. At school, she was not particularly fond of literature. All these works seemed boring to her. Half of the words she did not understand at all. Now was probably the right time. Besides, Emma had a cat. Maggie turned out to be a very clever and affectionate animal. It was like she could sense her mood. If Emma was sad, the cat would rub against her legs, as if to calm her down. And when her mistress was tired, Maggie became quieter than water, lower than grass. On that cold autumn evening, Emma packed a delicious dinner for Maggie, leftover red fish and beef scraps. For herself, of course, she'd grabbed something for herself too. It was amazing how much food was left in the kitchen. By the end of the shift, she'd saved a lot of money on food. Emma buttoned her jacket up to her throat and pulled her hat over her ears. She didn't feel like going outside. The wind was howling so hard the windows shook. It seemed to be starting to rain. But I couldn't spend the night at work. Maggie was at home, her favorite book, a soft couch. It was cozy and warm, though very lonely. And it's a short walk, a couple blocks, and Emma's there. She had rented an apartment near the restaurant, so she was saving not only on food but also on transportation. Had to be practical. When Emma heard that voice, a weak, shaky voice that sounded desperate. "Help me, please. I'm hungry." She stopped. It was very unexpected to hear a voice in the street in this weather, clearly belonging to a small child. "Can you help me?" Came from the cabin of a wooden-colored ship, standing proudly in the playground. A girl came out of it, a very young girl. She looked no more than 5 years old, huge, frightened brown eyes, plump lips, black, beautifully arched eyebrows. Tangled auburn strands were poking out from under a stretched cap. The girl was wearing a gray boy's jacket, which was 2 sizes too big for her. On her feet, she wore sneakers that were worn almost to the ground. Everything indicated that she came from a dysfunctional family. The girl looked at Emma with a scrutinizing stare, like she was trying to figure out if she was friend or foe. "What? What are you doing here?" Emma said at last. "I was walking down the street. It started to rain and the wind picked up, so I hid here." "Where are your parents?" "My mom died, and my dad disappeared somewhere," she said. "At first we traveled with him for a long, long time by train. It was great on the train, it was warm, the bed was clean, and there was plenty of food. We were going to Grandma." That's what Daddy said. "And then we got off the train. Daddy told us to wait for him and left. So I went to look for him, but he was nowhere to be found." "Why did you leave?" "Dad must have come back for you, but he didn't find you. Now he's worried, running around, looking for his daughter," Emma said. "I waited a long time," the little girl shook her head. "We came from the train station in the morning. I had already left at night when it got dark." It did seem strange. Emma couldn't understand why a man would leave his daughter alone all day to, I don't know, go to the bathroom or deposit her things in the luggage room. But according to the girl, she waited for her parent all day. "He probably abandoned me," sighed the little girl. "Daddy doesn't love me. Mom loved, but she died. And Daddy? I heard him tell his friend that I was a burden to him." Emma didn't know what to do. Leaving the girl out here in the cold wasn't an option, that's for sure. Dragging the child to the police wasn't an option either. The baby needed a good dinner and a warm bed. At the police station, she would have to sit on some chair all night, while they drew up a report, while they figured out where to put her, while they called the guardianship. "Let's go to my place now," Emma finally decided. "We'll eat, watch TV. I have a cat, you can play with it. And tomorrow we'll go to the police, and the uncles will decide what to do with you." "The police?" The girls tense right away. "Don't go to the police. I didn't do anything wrong." Emma realized that the little girl was afraid of the police for something. Most likely she had transferred such an attitude to law enforcement officials from her parents. Maybe they were doing something criminal? It's a possibility. Normal people don't put their kids in this situation. "The cops are good and kind," Emma reassured the little girl. "We'll ask them to find your daddy, okay?" Yes, she nodded and added, "I'm very hungry." "Auntie, do you have sausage at home?" Emma's heart squeezed with pity for this hungry, abandoned child. Somehow she reminded her of herself as a child, needed by no one, forgotten and abandoned by everyone. Emma held out her hand to the girl, who smiled and clung to it happily, on the way they met. The girl knew her name perfectly well, Emily, but she couldn't say her last name. It was strange for a rather small child of 5. Emily told a little about her life. At first, the little girl lived with her mom and dad somewhere either in a village or on the outskirts of a small town. The story of little Emily shook Emma to the core. The girl's parents apparently abused alcohol. Emily mentioned noisy companies, fights, falling asleep on the floor people, including complete strangers. And in all this ugliness, a small defenseless child was growing up. Listening to Emily, Emma thought that she was lucky to be in her aunt's family as a child. Yes, and she hadn't been loved much, much less spoiled. But she had never witnessed such horrifying scenes. Emily was driven to work almost every day by her parents. As Emma understood it, they would take her to the center of the small town and leave her at the crosswalk to beg for alms. Begging traveled a long way, according to the girl. Emily was given a lot of alms, of course, a doll like her. Her brown eyes alone were worth it. She had oriental features, swarthy skin, coal-black eyelashes and eyebrows. She looked like a beautiful, expensive doll. Even pity such a treasure. They don't cherish it, don't appreciate it, Emma thought. Emily should go to kindergarten, wear smart dresses, play with her friends. She is so energetic, bright, curious. But the girl had to spend her days in a dark underpass and beg for change from passers-by. "Did they hurt you there?" Emma asked, thinking about what could happen to a small child on the street. No, Emily shook her head. Everyone knew me in the passage, both Uncle Matvey and the guitarist, and Aunt Klava. She sold knitted socks. Daddy often came to check up on me. In the evening, Emily's family returned home, and everything went on as before. Sometimes Emily was alone for days in an empty house. Her parents were out at someone's house. Other times, company would gather at their place. Emily didn't know any other life, and therefore talked about everything that happened to her easily and casually. It was the norm for her. Emma, meanwhile, was almost moving the hairs on her head with horror. And then Mommy died. Emily sighed. Daddy said that Mommy had gotten some bad vodka. God saved him. He fell asleep before they opened the bottle, so he survived. But Mom didn't. Her friends were poisoned along with her. Emily missed her mother very much. According to the girl, her mother loved her, treated her with candy, called her beautiful princess, made her beautiful ponytails. But sometimes she beat her, of course. It usually happened on days when Emily didn't get much alms. But if they gave a lot, she kissed her daughter, hugged her, sang songs to her daughter, and looked at her with kind eyes. Daddy's not like that, Emily said. He never hugged me. He never sang me songs or told me stories. He doesn't love me, but he's still my daddy, and he takes care of me. Now he's lost or abandoned me because he doesn't need me. Finally, they got to Emma's apartment. Come on in. Don't be shy, she said. Maggie's here to see us and she missed us. Emily felt like she was in a normal apartment for the first time. Everything here seemed unusual, strange, amazing. It was the simple things that really excited the little girl. The bathroom, for example. Emma immediately filled it to the brim with warm water to wash the girl, or the lamp on the wall, or the toaster. Everything seemed like a post-war miracle. Emma wrapped Emily in her robe and carried her into the kitchen. Dinner from an expensive restaurant was waiting for her here: grilled vegetables, chicken kebab, and fruit. At the sight of such a variety of Emily even confused. Is this what to eat? Can I have it? You. Emma smiled. Taste it. It's delicious. Emily greedily devoured the food. It was obvious that the little girl had been starving. Then Emma put Emily to bed on a makeshift bed made of 2 upholstered armchairs. She didn't have a second bed in her apartment. I love it here, the sleepy little girl said. May my daddy never be found at all. I want to stay with you. These words echoed warmly in Emma's heart. Emma was pleased that Emily liked it at her place. On the other hand, she couldn't get too attached to the little girl. She'd have to go to the police with her tomorrow anyway. That's a shame. It's so nice to take care of a child, to see its happy eyes, to open the world to it. I can't tell you how it feels. Even if only for one evening, but Emma felt like a mother of a wonderful girl. In the morning, she had to dress the baby in her old dirty clothes. There were no other clothes. Emma asked for time off work and explained the situation. They were sympathetic and even gave advice on how to talk to the police, so that they would not think that a kind woman had taken someone else's child. Emma was surprised. She had never even thought of such a possibility. At the police station, she went to the duty officer and told him her story. He looked at the 2 visitors with surprised eyes and called somewhere. Then he called the number of the office and let the woman with the child through the turnstile. The young man in shoulder straps listened to her, then asked Emily a few questions, then wrote down Emma's data and suggested she go home. What about the girl? What about the girl? Emma asked. We'll deal with it now. You stay in touch. Most importantly, we'll be in touch. You're a witness in this case now. What's going to happen to her? Emma was no longer indifferent to Emily's fate, especially since the girl clung so trustingly to her hand. What would it be like to walk away and leave her here with strangers? The little girl had been through enough. Can I take her? I promise to be in touch with you 24 hours a day and to take the child wherever she needs to go. The policeman shook his head negatively. I could see in his eyes that he would love to help Emma and Emily, but he wasn't supposed to. I want to take her away. The words came out of Emma's mouth before she could think. If her parents can't be found, I'll take custody of the child, temporary or permanent. It doesn't matter, as long as she's with me. Are you sure? The policeman looked at Emma in surprise. More than sure, she replied. I don't want her in an orphanage or a hospital. Let her go through all the necessary procedures with me. I'll sign everything that needs to be signed, and I'll provide the certificates. We'll keep that in mind, the policeman nodded, making some notes in his report. But Emily still had to spend about a month with strangers. First, she was put in the hospital, in the so-called quarantine block. There the girl was examined from head to toe. It turned out that the health of the little girl is excellent. Then Emily went to the orphanage. Emma visited the little girl almost every day. When Emily saw her, she would rush to her and hug her tightly. It was such a sweet moment. Every time Emma brought her a treat, some sweets, or an interesting toy. It was a joy to see the child's eyes light up with joy. All this time Emma was preparing the documents for the adoption of the girl, collecting the necessary certificates, attending the school of foster parents. She could not imagine that Emily would live with someone else. And the girl herself was drawn to Emma with all her soul. It's a pity that the opinion of a 5-year-old child is unlikely to be taken into account in court. The search for Emily's father hasn't progressed. Alerts, interviews with possible witnesses, advertisements, TV spots. Nothing worked. Emily's parents seemed to have fallen through the cracks. Emma was inclined to believe that the little girl was right. Her father had really abandoned his daughter, just left her at the train station in a strange city. Emma had problems with adoption. She was an unmarried woman. She had no place of her own. Her salary was small. Everything was going to send Emily to an orphanage. And their embittered children, angry educators. Emma could not imagine tender little Emily in such conditions. Although the girl had a lot of things to live through for her 5 years, but still she had parents who took care of her as much as they could. In the orphanage, everything will be different. The situation with Emily's adoption was indeed a difficult one for Emma, but she kept her hands up and was determined to solve the problem. Colleagues advised Emma to hire a lawyer specializing in such cases. The services of a professional cost a lot, and Emma had to sell the jewelry, which once gave her a former lover. These jewelry were for her a memory of happy times, but for the sake of Emily, she did not hesitate to part with them. The lawyer had to work hard. The case was not easy, but in the end, he prevailed. The day Emma received the adoption order from the court, she felt like a huge burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She and Emily would now be together. The baby was saved. She wouldn't have to live in the orphanage. And Emma now has her long-awaited native child, the most precious treasure. Emma immediately went to the orphanage to take Emily home. The girl even cried from the excess of emotion. "I will leave with you and never come back here again," rejoiced Emily, hugging Emma. At home, everything was ready for the arrival of the little girl: a new crib, a closet with dressy dresses, a desk for studying. Emma fulfilled all the requirements of the guardianship authorities, setting up a full-fledged children's corner for the girl. And she herself took great joy in choosing furniture, clothes, toys, and books for Emily. It is much more pleasant to take care of someone than to take care of yourself. So for almost 40-year-old Emma began a new, completely different life. But now the change was definitely for the better. Emily turned out to be just a gift child, lively, inquisitive, but at the same time obedient. This clever and kind little girl tried her best to take care of her new mother. And it was so touching that Emma had tears every time. Emma and Emily's life after the adoption was filled with joy and new experiences. Emily quickly adapted, finally finding a long-awaited home and a caring mother. Soon the girl went to kindergarten, where she immediately made a lot of friends. Energetic, intelligent Emily was always in the center of attention, inventing exciting games and activities that like a magnet attracted other children to her. Emma couldn't get enough of her daughter. Emily did not remember much about the past, as if she had decided to forget everything that had happened before she met Emma. Only occasionally at night she stirred restlessly and sobbed apparently, and her subconscious still remained unpleasant memories of life with her biological parents. But in the morning the girl could not say what she dreamed. When Emily went to school, it turned out that she has a great aptitude for math. While classmates solved simple examples, she, having coped with the compulsory part, took on the Olympiad tasks for high school students. Fortunately, the teacher immediately recognized the talent of the little student and developed it in every possible way. In middle school, Emily became interested in computer science and programming. Emma looked at her daughter and marveled at how all these complex formulas and algorithms fit into the head of a 13-year-old. The woman herself was stupefied by a single contemplation of the code, and Emily drummed her fingers on the keys with a keen look, solving one puzzle after another. Emily won local and regional Olympiads more than once. Teachers believed that the girl had a great future. Emma was proud of her daughter and loved her immensely. and at the same time she was constantly worried about her. As any mother, it is an inevitable price for the happiness of motherhood. Emma was perplexed. How, in a family of marginalized people who abused alcohol and neglected her daughter to such an extent that she begged for alms in the underground passages, could be born such a gifted girl? How could she suddenly have such brilliant abilities? It seemed strange to Emma. Emma didn't have time to ponder Emily's fate for a particularly long time. She had to work even harder now. She wanted to dress Emily in beautiful fancy clothes, feed her daughter delicious and healthy food. But it all required money. So Emma did her best. It was hard to be alone, but the woman did not regret anything. On the contrary, she considered herself happy. Fate had given her such a luxurious gift, Emily. It was an ordinary fall evening. Emily was already asleep with her hand under her cheek, just like when she was a child. Wow, how fast children grow up. 8 years had flown by. Emily had grown from a touching little girl into a beautiful young woman. Huge brown eyes, long shiny hair the color of melted chocolate. A slender, tall, swarthy girl. The admixture of Oriental blood gave the girl's appearance a special flavor. A beauty and a clever girl too. Nature was not stingy, generously endowing Emily with everything at once. Emma smiled and returned to the laptop screen. The woman was trying to find the TV series she had been told about at work. The search engine, as usual, came up with a bunch of unnecessary stuff. Emma was about to close the tab, but then her eyes caught on a picture. The woman looked at it and could not believe her eyes. A slender teenage girl with long brown hair and a dazzling smile. Behind her, the merry sea was rushing by. She posed in a bright pink swimsuit on the ocean. The wind fluttered the young beauty's hair. Behind her, the waves were splashing, and it was Emily. The same facial features, the same smile. Even the proportions of her figure were the same. But how was that possible? Her girl had never been to the sea. The ocean, white sand, palm trees. The longer Emma gazed at this girl, the more she wondered. The teenager didn't just look like her daughter. It was Emily. Emma could even see the mole on her thigh. Emily had the exact same one. She pulled away from the screen and took a few deep breaths. This couldn't be a mere coincidence. Gathering her wits, the woman clicked on the photo. It turned out that the picture was on a social networking site on the page of one John Williams. Apparently, the girl was his daughter. In the profile of this stranger were more photos. On some of them was present an Emily. That was the name of the young beauty posing against the ocean. Emma wasn't good at English, but she could tell from the captions on the pictures. The family lived in a large and beautiful house. Often traveled mother, father, and daughter Emily, incredibly similar to Emily. The girl's mother was young, so Emily turned out to be such an exotic beauty the mixture of blood gave a spectacular result. It happens all the time. Emma couldn't take her eyes off this Emily. Mimicry, facial features, features of the figure the girl was an exact copy of Emily. The most interesting thing is that the head of the family, apparently, worked in the field of technology. This was evidenced by the photos on his page. And after all, Emily also has a talent for programming. Emma made up her mind. She sent a letter to John in Russian without even bothering to translate it into a translator he'd figure it out. She attached several photos of Emily to the message. In the letter she told the story of her girl. Maybe it was all just a coincidence, but something told Emma that such coincidences just didn't happen. John replied right away. He thanked Emma and asked her to stay in touch. He wrote that he couldn't tell her everything now, but he wanted to meet her and was even willing to fly to Russia for that. He was going to do it as soon as possible. John asked Emma when it would be convenient for her to meet, anytime. Emma texted him and turned off her computer. What had just happened now? Why did she immediately, without even thinking of the consequences, write John that letter? What would happen now? Emma's heart clenched with icy anxiety. She wished she could go back in time and not send that letter to the stranger from the internet. But Emma had always acted in her daughter's best interests. And she'd done the same this time. What's in store for Emily and Emma? Her foster mom has no money, no connections. The girl has already refused several times to participate in programming contests and tournaments just because Emma could not pay her way. Sponsors were not always found, unfortunately. Besides, Emily is already 13 years old. She hadn't seen the sea, hadn't gone on vacation to big cities, hadn't traveled at all. Emma simply could not pay for all this, although she tried very hard, worked hard. And here was a wealthy programmer from California. Maybe he could be a part of Emily's destiny. I mean, she looks just like his daughter. There's a reason for that. In the morning, Emma told her daughter. She was surprised. The girl looked at the photos on John's page for a long time, frowning her eyebrows, thinking about something. I think I remember these places. Or rather, not so much I don't remember, but I dream about something like this house sometimes. Unsure, of course. Maybe just something similar. Interiors like this are often glimpsed in Hollywood movies. It's amazing. But the weird thing is that we look like copies of each other. Her hair is only a little shorter, but everything else is the same. It's weird that Emily agreed. But I read once that every person on the planet has a doppelganger. Everyone, in fact. Maybe you found my doppelganger. Emma shook her head. She had some thoughts about the girl's similarities, but she didn't voice them to her daughter. John flew in 2 days after Emma had written him the first letter. All the time before his arrival, they continued to correspond. The man wanted to know the smallest details about how Emma had found Emily. She'd told him everything without a word. What now? They met at a local coffee shop. Emily was at school and Emma had the day off. John was a tall, trim man with blue eyes and blonde hair. He didn't seem to look anything like Emily. I am a professional editor with a degree in philology and 20 years of experience. Here is the edited text to meet your requirements. And yet the attentive Emma caught the resemblance, the dimples on John's cheeks when he smiled, and the eyes. The man nodded in the same way. Even his nose seemed to wrinkle. It turned out that John knew Russian. He'd worked with Russian developers for a long time, so he'd learned it. Of course, the man confused words and cases and spoke with a terrible accent, but Emma understood him perfectly. It's an incredible story, John said as they sat down at the table. I couldn't believe it when I saw your daughter's picture. I'm so glad you wrote to me. Emma nodded. She wasn't sure she had done the right thing. She felt like her life was taking another turn. Things were about to change again, and she didn't know if it would be for the better. John might take Mary away from her. Emma could sense that, and she could already guess that Mary was no stranger to the man. John made a pleasant impression, handsome, polite, energetic, very friendly. Emma could almost physically feel the warmth emanating from him. There was nothing repulsive or suspicious about him to fear or dislike. And then he told his story. Emma caught every word greedily. A lot of things fell into place now. The puzzle was coming together, but what to do next? John was a talented computer programmer. After high school, he moved to California, where he first attended university and then got a job. He bought a house, married the beautiful Leah. His career was going uphill. The young, talented programmer was entrusted with complex projects, and one day he got into a team that cooperated with developers from Russia. They all worked together on a grandiose international project. In John's personal life, too, everything went as well as possible. The young family was born 2 twin girls at once. John and his wife Leah were happy, healthy, beautiful daughters, financial prosperity, love, and mutual understanding between spouses. What more is needed? When Maggie and Lexi were 2 years old, John was sent on a business trip to Moscow. He had to solve several work issues. A matter of a few hours a day. The man still had a lot of time left to get acquainted with this beautiful city, and he made a huge mistake. He offered Leah and the girls to go with him. This trip was supposed to be an exciting journey, but it turned out to be a real nightmare for their family. At first, everything was going just fine. John would drive to the office for 2 or 3 hours in the morning, and then walk around Moscow with his family all day. They all visited the zoo together, went to the Tretyakov Gallery, walked around Red Square. It is true that 2 small children are not only mindfulness, joy, and happiness. Both young parents were tired. Probably this was the reason that one day John and Leah let their guard down. It happened in a park, a huge, beautiful park with fountains, wide, flat paths, and playgrounds. There were many people in the park on that sunny day. It was not surprising the weather was great. The weekend was ahead. It was as if parents decided to take their children for a walk. A colorful, dressy, and inviting crowd. John held Maggie's hand. He assumed his wife was holding Lexi's hand in the same way. For a while, Leah and her daughter disappeared from the man's view. Somehow the sea of people had swept them in different directions. Lexi had always been more curious, more energetic than Maggie. Always running, climbing and scrambling. Everything was interesting to her. Leah was better at handling her. John thought Lexi was dragging his wife off to find adventure again. It happened so often. He wasn't worried at all. 5 or 6 minutes passed, no more. When John finally saw Leah, she was standing at the monument, looking around for her family. When she saw John, the woman smiled and rushed toward him. She was alone, without Lexi. John tensed up, of course, but didn't panic yet, because he didn't know if Lexi had stayed on the swings or was tailed behind her mother's back and was just out of sight. But then Leah asked a question. "Where is Lexi?" she asked, looking anxiously at her husband. That's when John realized everything and turned cold with horror. Leah thought Lexi was with him, but he thought the daughter had stayed with his wife. The little girl was lost, and it had been about 7 minutes, if not more. How to find her in this huge park with so many people? What to do? John immediately called the police. They responded to the call with lightning speed, because it was a missing small child. A squad arrived at the park. At first, everyone hoped that the girl would be found quickly. Just lost, just wandering somewhere on the paths, admiring the neighborhood, exploring the world. It was in Lexi's nature. But the little girl seemed to fall through the ground. It soon became clear that something had happened to her. "We had to come home after a month," John continued. "We left with nothing. We didn't know where our little girl was or what had happened to her. It was horrible. There aren't even words to describe how Leah and I felt. We couldn't sleep, we couldn't sleep, we couldn't sleep. And we blamed each other. We were on pins and needles. I was in constant contact with your law enforcement, even hired private investigators. They worked on the case too, but not a single lead. Lexi disappeared, like she vanished into thin air. Years went by. There was little hope of finding Lexi. Emily grew, matured, transformed from a little girl into a beautiful young woman. Looking at her, Leah and John could easily imagine what their Lexi looked like now. The search was still going on, but of course not as intensely anymore. It had been 11 years, after all. Leah always felt that Lexi was alive. John shook his head. She didn't doubt it, and she was right, Emma said. Kira was Lexi. There was no doubt about it. Then, years ago, the little girl had been taken from the park. The girl was probably too young to pronounce her name correctly, and the people who had taken her had decided her name was Kira, not Lexi. Of course, Kira didn't remember anything. She was just a little girl, after all. She was barely 2 years old. She gradually got used to her new mom and dad, learned the language. They made a professional dancer out of her. That's probably why they took her. And then something went wrong. Kira's so-called mother passed away, and the father? Maybe he found someone else. A way to make money, and he didn't need the girl. So he brought her to a train station far from the city, where he left her with a light heart. Then Emma found Kira. All that time in California, the girl's real parents were worried sick. No, they had to learn to live with the loss, but I can't even imagine what Leah and Jonathan had to endure, not knowing the fate of their own child. It would drive you crazy. I guess the only thing that saved their parents was that they had another daughter, Emily. She's the only thing that kept them going. And then you send me this letter and a picture of my daughter. I'm sure you're Kira's, Lexi, John continued. I haven't told my wife yet. I need to check everything first, do a DNA test to know for sure. Because if there's been a mistake, Leah won't be able to bear it. There was no mistake, of course. The test confirmed Kira and Jonathan's parentage. I told my daughter everything honestly, Emma said. The woman, of course, was worried. Now that Kira's family had been found, she would be alone again. How could she live without her daughter? How to tear her out of her heart? And she'd have to do it anyway. Kira's not her property. It's important for her to live with her blood relatives, and they can give her so much more than I can. She may not be rich, but she has a bright future with them. I marveled at the way Kira and Jonathan interacted. You could tell they were soulmates. Kira talked to her father as if they hadn't been apart for years. They laughed at the same jokes, discussed programming languages, argued over solving complex problems, understood each other with half a word, even half a look. Emma immediately realized that Kira was 100% her father's daughter. The woman wasn't jealous? No. She was happy for the girl. Now Kira would be truly happy. The paperwork took a while. Kira continued to live with Emma. John, on the other hand, preferred to stay in a hotel so as not to bother his landlady. They saw each other every day, walked, talked, discussed the future. Kira was leaving with her father. It was already a settled matter. The girl was looking forward to meeting her mother, and especially her sister Emily. She was a little worried, but lived the days before the flight in joyful anticipation. You bet, the girl would soon have a whole new life. But it was hard for Kira to part with Emma, the person who had raised her. How will I be without you? Sighed in the evenings the girl. I do not understand what is happening to me. I seem to want to leave as soon as possible, to see how things work there, to meet my mom and sister. But without you, I'll feel bad. We'll get used to it, Emma smiled. And then we'll see each other. I'll come to visit you, and you'll visit me here sometimes. And Skype too. It's not like that, you know. Of course, Emma understood. She tried her best not to show her sadness to Kira. Emma was used to having such a sweet little girl in her life. She'd raised her, considered her a daughter, but that didn't give her the right to make Kira her property. No, Emma had made the decision that was most helpful and beneficial to Kira, and now she had no doubt that she'd done the right thing. And then Kira and John flew away. A cold emptiness formed in Emma's soul at the same moment. Yes, once again the woman was starting a new life, and it would take some getting used to. Kira wrote and called often. She quickly settled into the new place, made friends. Emma had no doubt that she would. Kira talked excitedly about how much fun she was having, but she always ended the conversation with a phrase about how much she missed Emma. If only she knew how much Emma missed her. A few months passed. It was New Year's Eve. Emma decided not to decorate the tree this time. She had always done it for Kira. Now why would she do it? Emma was spending the holiday alone. She'd been invited to visit, but she declined. She wasn't in the mood. She wanted peace, quiet, comfort. She wanted to sit quietly, watch a New Year's Eve program on TV and think about her own thoughts. Just at that moment, a beep sounded, announcing an incoming Skype video call. Emma smiled. Of course it was Kira. There was no one else. Indeed, a smiling Kira appeared on the screen. The girl's eyes were shining as always. Behind her shoulder loomed Emily. Emma still couldn't get used to the fact that the sisters were so much alike. Since the reunion, they had become inseparable. Kira wished Emma a happy new year, wished her happiness and good luck, told her again that she missed her, and then announced that John wanted to talk to her too. Emma wasn't surprised. She had talked to both him and Leah often. They told her how things were going with Kira and constantly thanked her for saving their baby girl. John probably wants to wish her a happy new year. There's nothing special about it, but from the look on John's face, Emma somehow immediately guessed that her life was kind of ready to take another steep turn. The man looked serious and determined. The woman's stomach even churned with an uneasy feeling of foreboding. John did indeed wish her a happy new year. And then he said, looking into Emma's eyes, Kira misses you very much. Very much. Kira wrote and called often. She quickly settled into her new place and made friends. Emma had no doubt that she would. Kira talked excitedly about how much fun she was having, but she always ended the conversation with a phrase about how much she missed Emma. If only she knew how much Emma herself missed her. A few months passed. It was New Year's Eve. Emma decided not to decorate the tree this time. She had always done it for Kira. Now why would she do it? Emma was spending the holiday alone. She'd been invited to visit, but she declined. She wasn't in the mood. She wanted peace, quiet, comfort. She wanted to sit quietly, watch a New Year's Eve program on TV and think about her own thoughts. Just at that moment, a beep sounded, announcing an incoming Skype video call. Emma smiled. Of course it was Kira. There was no one else. Indeed, a smiling Kira appeared on the screen. The girl's eyes were shining as always. Mary loomed over her shoulder. Emma still couldn't get used to the fact that the sisters were so much alike. Since the reunion, they had become inseparable. Kira wished Emma a happy new year, wished her happiness and good luck, told her again that she missed her, and then announced that John wanted to talk to her too. Emma wasn't surprised. She had talked to both him and Leah often. They told her how things were going with Kira and constantly thanked her for saving their baby girl. John probably wants to wish her a happy new year. There's nothing special about it, but from the look on John's face, Emma somehow immediately guessed that her life was kind of ready to take another steep turn. The man looked serious and determined. The woman's stomach even churned with an uneasy feeling of foreboding. John did indeed wish her a happy new year. And then he said, looking into Emma's eyes, "She has everything to be happy, but she's still not completely happy. Does she miss you? Mary and I thought it would pass. We could just call each other, visit each other. But you two seem to have formed a strong bond. Kira. It literally splits in two. One part is reaching across the ocean to you, and the other part wants to stay with us. The pediatrician said it was very dangerous to her health. So then I decided to make you an offer you just couldn't refuse." Emma was shocked by John's offer. It had never occurred to her that they might take such a step. Turns out there was a small house and lot for sale near them a few years ago, and John bought it for me after losing one of his daughters. The couple wanted the other one to stay with them, even as an adult. So they bought this house, where they planned for me to live with my husband and children. But Kira and Maggie are just kids. Besides, they both already said they don't want to live in your neighborhood. They both have grandiose plans to conquer the world, and your cozy neighborhood is too crowded for them. John smiled. Anyway, the house is empty. We're asking you to move in. Emma looked at John in silence. She didn't even know what to say. His words were too good to be true. Would she really be living next to Chris? Yes, she would have to get used to everything new, learn the language. But that doesn't matter. If you get a chance to talk to Chris every day, John continued, will there be a job for you here? A lot of families need a nanny. Do you have any experience? Besides, there are a lot of restaurants here that are always in need of kitchen helpers. Chris said you might be the right person for the job. So you'll take it? There's nothing keeping you in your own town. This way. You'll be close to Chris. The girl's very attracted to you. She needs you and we need you. Mary and I want to do something nice for the man who saved our daughter." Emma suddenly realized that these people were like family to her. They cared for her happiness as if she were their own. "We are one family," she said quietly, looking at the screen and smiling. "Now the house still sits idle for nothing. I will also take care of it, so I will help you a lot. But what do I think of your offer?" Emma looked at John, who was waiting for an answer. "I suppose I should say that I need to think about it, weigh up the pros and cons. But why? Because the decision is already in my head. It's just great news. Of course I'm in."